Go live. So, Dan,
Yes, yes,
so
sir.
good to see you. I'm going to leave you on the Zoom because I mean, while I'm talking, because we're going to talk because you're an old friend. People who saw what we posted, in the in the the
What,
the
last
promotional.
week or what?
Yeah, they would have seen the picture of me and you way back when. I swear that might have been high school, but it's not high school. I didn't know you in high school. That was
No.
we were young adults. I think
Yeah. It was in the 80s.
it was in the 80s.
Right around the time, I think it was just before the snap election
Yeah, and
in
so
the Philippines.
but it shows you how young we looked in the 80s and also how I think was that a Filipino it was a Filipino community event, right?
It was a big one. It
Yeah.
was top 10 Filipinos.
Was it the top 10? Wow.
Mm-hmm.
But it also shows how even in the 80s the Filipino community was very similar to how the Filipino community was in the 60s, the 70s, the 50s.
Yeah, same players. Same
Yeah,
players.
same
You had a
players.
lot of the folks who were, it was a combination, the leadership was a combination of post-World War II.
Mm.
Moms, particularly, the women really were the power behind the throne.
Right.
And then there were a lot of post-65s. So that's the way it went. And a lot of the post-65ers took great pride in the labeling themselves the professionals.
Right.
Because they, were college educated, some with advanced degrees, but the majority not necessarily practicing in the fields that they got their degrees in, or that they even had professional experience in the Philippines prior to their arrival here.
Yeah, the big scandal was, and this was all covered in the Filipino American ethnic newspapers that were published here. And when I say Filipino newspapers, I mean they would cover the Filipino news here, plus they would cover news in the Philippines. And
That's
sometimes there'd be a balance or an out of balance. And of course, that was the time of Marcos, so there was a lot more Philippine news. But the Filipino American news was that, hey, what's going on? We're doctors, we're lawyers, but we can get jobs as janitors. Or we're not necessarily lawyers. The lawyers usually could get jobs as lawyers, but they had to go through a recertification. And this was also a big deal with the accountants who came over from the Philippines.
Teachers too.
And we're bringing this all up because this is part of our history. And this is the kind of history that we get from just looking at that promotional picture that I put up on Facebook on the FANHS museum page showing Dan looking lithe and younger and
I'm of course have to go look at that right now.
And I was a curly cued Filipino with my success perm. I don't know what was I think I was watching too many pop culture.
That was actually your nice. I like that haircut.
You like that hair? Oh, great.
You had a couple of different haircuts. The one that I liked all of them, but the one that I made most fun of was the Jerry Rice.
The Jerry
Rice look.
The Jerry curl look. Is that it?
Well, no, Jerry Rice. Jerry Rice had a kind of he had curly, loose, not loose curl, but curls on top and shaved sides.
The fade. No, look,
it had the fade.
You got it all wrong. That was a Kim Jong-un fade.
He wasn't even was he a twinkle in his father's
eye?
All right,
it was a Kim Jong-il. It was a Kim Jong-il fade.
Okay. Yeah, Jerry, you had a Jerry Rice look, and I used to call you Fifi.
This is the thing that when you do things on television and they have like little bits, photos of you, it sometimes is kind of, you see the passage of time, you see the evolution.
I hope so. Yeah. Look at that. Look at the color of my hair.
Yeah. Well, I'm telling you, I got a joke in my new solo show about why my hair is the color it is, and you're just going to have to see my show when it comes out, the Amok Monologues COVID edition. Um, but anyway, look, let me do a formal introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm Emil Guillermo with the Filipino American National Historical Society Museum. We are again closed. We're a volunteer organization. People don't realize this. We're a volunteer organization. And to show you how much we're a volunteer organization, we sometimes ask for your support. Maybe a little, maybe a tad much, but it's all out of the heart to help us do what we do, which is keep the museum alive, even though we're under COVID and we're closed. We have a green light to open up as long as we stay red, but that means we have to limit the numbers of people who come to the museum. And we also have to get our volunteers together, and a lot of our volunteers are in at-risk categories, so we have to train to get a little more, I guess, just to be extra careful, right? You see the spikes going up all around the country, yep. And you just can't open up too soon just because you have a red light. So we're closed again, and we have to pay our rent, though. And we support programs like this, where we go live and do our virtual pop-ups. And our virtual pop-ups are intended to tell the story of Filipino American history, tell the story of Filipino Americans, of course, back in the day and right now. There's so much going on right now online. Just today, I've been not bombarded, but alerted to several things going on online. So if you're catching us, I appreciate you doing so. These are our virtual pop-ups we do Saturday and Sunday when the museum's normally open. We check in with you, so you check in with us. Remember, the museum is where you are. I mean, that's our approach. We're going to tell some stories. We're going to talk about what's going on in the news. We're going to talk about what it means to be Filipino American now during this very engaging, very exciting historical moment of elections and viruses. And this is an historical moment. How Filipinos react to the things that are going on now, we'll be talking about in the next 2 years, 5 years, 25 years. We'll be talking about it. Take note, take pictures, remember, write down a diary, talk about the things that you had to do instead of the things you would have done. Those are all part of our history, and we're gonna talk about those things on these pop-ups. Our pop-ups are at 11:45 Pacific. Our pre-show, you know, like you have the Super Bowl and you have our pre-show. This is a pre-show. The actual show will begin at noon, where we talk formally with Professor Dan Gonzales of the College of Ethnic Studies, San Francisco State, Filipino American Studies. And Dan has been a great resource, and he, along with others from San Francisco State, like Alex Fabros, big supporters of FANHS in the past. And I like to call on them to sort of help guide us as we talk about things, because this is, after all, October, Filipino American History Month. And the significance of today, October 17th. October 15th really was a kind of a significant day, but as we spill over into the rest of October, October is all our own. You'll recall that between September 15th and October 15th, it was, the official name was they called it National Hispanic Heritage Month. By public law 1988, public law 100-402. They got September to October 15th, a little bit like how the Spanish kind of, colonized, peoples and countries. They took over both months. But from October 15th on, we have the month of October all to ourselves. It's Filipino American History Month, based on a congressional resolution in 2009. It was started by the Filipino American, National Historical Society, which is sort of the big group out of Seattle in 1991. But it became an actual public law in 2009. And from October 15th to the end of Halloween, we have it all to ourselves. And one thing I've noticed, Dan, tell me if you've noticed this too. people are noticing it's Filipino American History Month. People are stopping and saying, hey, it's Filipino American. There's buy-in. What do you think?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, there's a lot more buy-in. I think there's a lot of reasons, but most of it is just internet and social media. I think that had a lot to do with it. I think the younger generation is curious, and there are very few resources. I think that's one of the things that I'm trying to cure in my retirement and my old age is putting more stuff up that's accessible on the web. I really haven't been much of a participant in all of the stuff that goes on Facebook that's about Filipino American history. I comment on it,
Yeah.
but I don't contribute analytical articles as much as analytical comments. And so I think I've got a pretty good photograph collection, and I'm going to start putting that up. And I'm also going, about the period that we were talking about earlier, the 80s,
The
90s.
80s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Yeah, it really is a critical time. But
80s was huge. 80s was huge.
Oh yeah,
well, for Filipinos,
you have the fall of Marcos, the rise of people power. You have the split situation between Filipinos there and Filipinos here coming together, and really the rise of the post-65 immigration really happened then, and it actually continues to this day, right?
It does.
Coming in, and that is the Filipino community. And so in some respects, when you want to talk about history, we can go talk about my dad, how he came in the 20s, your dad came in the 20s, how your dad also fought in the war, very important. My dad did not fight in the war, suffered all those years between the 20s and really the post-war, where more Filipino women were allowed to come in and they start Filipino families. There were people in the 20s who started families, and those are the older members of the so-called bridge generation. And there's a lot of discussion about that because those members of the bridge generation, Filipino Americans born here, are in their 90s.
Yeah.
And older. Right. And we got to talk to people like Peter Jamero, who you can check into my podcast, which is posted on the Filipino American National Historical Society Museum site on Facebook. Check out.
He has his own blog as well.
Yeah, so. And Peter has his own blog. Still lively, has a couple of books out. But I always, say, hey, look, he's the bridge. I guess I'm the off ramp, or I'm sort of, because he was there at the beginning, right? When
you're the truck stop.
Right. Yeah. If your father was
a safe truck stop, though.
Yeah. If your father was able to start a family in the 20s and 30s. That puts you in a unique position. And
a lot of the Manongs did. The problem is they left those families behind in the Philippines.
Well, that's the truth too. That I'm talking about Filipino American families, people who started here in Stockton or in California or wherever. But you're right. I know of all the Manongs who stayed at my family's house in the 50s, who came here and followed the plan, come to America, leave your family in the Philippines, send money back.
Right.
And that's how you're going to bankroll your Filipino family back there. You live a Boy Scout's life here in America in the 50s and 60s and 70s. Maybe some did, some didn't,
my dad and his cousins and friends did not live Boy Scout lives.
Did not. Well, see, now that's the other side of the Filipino American historical story. I mean,
it's the part that people don't visit often, but
Well, look, if you're not truly Filipino, you'd be talking about it. But if you're Filipino,
the problem
you don't talk about it.
Well, see, all the way up until the 70s, the problem was that if you looked for historical material dealing with Filipinos in the United States,
right,
the vast majority of the so-called scholarly work included descriptions of our best and worst behavior. Best behavior that we were really desirable as field workers because we were very efficient, took pride in our work and all the rest of that stuff. And I don't want to make light of that, but there was also a racist underside to that.
Of course.
And, all of the short hoe jokes, the Filipinos are better at cutting asparagus because they're closer to the ground. And that was done by a senator from Hollywood to the United States Senate.
Yeah.
At a Filipino event. That's how in your face the racism was,
Well, the in your face racism was all throughout. I mean, my father came in 28. How in your face racism was the 1934 Tidings McDuffie Act. That's kind of in your face, and
but that was embraced heartily by the Philippine government.
Yeah, well, because they got independence out of it at the expense of those Filipinos who came here to America and then had to realize, well, do I repatriate or not? I mean,
I don't think people emphasize that enough.
Well, they don't.
The thing that you just said, which is at the expense of Filipinos in America.
They don't talk about it enough. And see, this is one of the things about these pop-ups. We talk about history. Some people think, oh, history sounds so boring. How does it deal with our lives now? Well, everything you do now is because of something that happened 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 100 years ago.
That's been my job for 50 years.
Well, that's what you're.
That connection. That's been my job.
You're a professional historian. A lot of people say, oh.
History. No, I'm actually a political scientist, and
a lawyer.
And a lawyer. But and also international relations was my undergraduate double major. I had IR and poli-sci.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's really what I'm into. I'm only historian to the extent that it's needed. History is the common discipline among all of the social sciences, and it's also the one area in common directly with the humanities. History still gets treated as humanities because it's seen as a storyline, right, which is okay. But the 70s and 80s, a lot of historians, particularly academics, working on major universities, wanted to convert history to a behavioral and social science. Yeah. They were because of the advent of computers, they wanted to do data.
People want data.
Data. They want data. Data oriented.
Same thing like journalism. They want data. We're Filipinos. We want datus. See those Filipino American puns.
That was horrendous. Don't use that one in your show, okay? That's really bad.
Okay, when we do the show, don't use that datu pun.
Or
So, but you're right. That history sometimes is seen as like not particularly hip, not particularly relevant, but it is the story and it is relevant. And one of the things I like to do, look, forget the scholarly stuff, forget the footnotes, no footnotes here. Oh, we can footnote. We can
actually we do footnote.
we can make citation, but the point is
that's what we do.
We talk about history in a way that's real, in a way that includes you, the viewer out there.
I think a lot of viewers would like to hear the footnotes. I mean, as long as we do them quickly and we don't get too deep.
They do, but what I'm saying, sometimes history is a turnoff because people say, "Oh, I'm not a scholar," and that people will say, "Oh, those guys talking about history, they're not scholars." Well, you're a scholar. I'm sort of like I'm the conduit. I've always been
Harvard.
Well, I've always
history.
I have always been, because of media and because of broadcasting and journalism. First draft, the guy who popularizes, the guy who tries to make things more My Weekly Reader instead of New York Times, so that people understand what's going on. And if they do understand, then they can fully embrace it, and then they can take that deeper dive on their own. But
history becomes really much more interesting when we look at the mistakes, omissions, and even sins.
Oh yeah,
committed by our folks. Then it becomes that's what makes it real.
Yeah. Well, too many omissions. There's too many omissions, and there's natural omissions because Filipinos are reticent and don't want to make sure that the record is there.
How come? Why is that?
Well, I don't know. There is a kind of a cultural thing that the willingness for Filipinos to suppress the truth and
Yeah.
give that rosier picture?
Yeah. Well, that's more psychology. I always say that politics and history are really dependent on psychology. You know, it all comes down to what people believe, because what they believe is going to determine how they act.
Yeah.
And that's what we record as historians, is how people act. And then we try to leave a record of that. That's when we go to the first draft, which is a lot of the news media coverage in whatever form that takes.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I teach in my class is you can't, what makes the preference in the 80s, the contest was, especially when FANHS was just getting started, right? Dorothy Cordova had just applied for the first major grant that would lead to the formation of FANHS. And it was the Filipinos Forgotten Asian Americans project, which turned into a book that was narrated and by Fred Cordova.
Still a good book, still a resource.
Yeah, and a lot of people, particularly children of that generation, that even younger than us, started getting involved through FANHS. And some of them became major writers of history in their own right, and they published books. I'm thinking right now, actually they were related to the Cordovas as well. There's, and Dawn is kind of, Dawn Mabalon was in between generations, right? She's younger than us, but she was a little bit older than some of her cousins that also went ahead and got PhDs, fooled them again,
Yeah, I remember when I first met Dawn, it was at a Filipino function in San Francisco. And here's this, Dawn, she was carrying around she was in her video mode days. And she had expensive video cameras. She's going around taking pictures. Like, who is that woman taking pictures? Why did I know her? Why did I know her better? And I really got to know Dawn when I got to Stockton to work to write a column at the Record, and that's when she and Dylan Delvo got into
some of the best zinger jokes, and Dawn was a hell of a comedian. She was really good, really good. So
I just, I miss her. And, if you're a regular listener to our pop-ups, that we talk about her book, Little Manila's in the Heart, a lot, as a reference. So, this whole thing about history, we try to make history accessible, try to make history real. Dan mentioned Fred Cordova, and I remember talking to Fred up in Seattle at the archive, and his whole thing was, hey, the founding of FANHS was to take it out of the ivory tower and put it in the community. That's why I think FANHS has value. And that's why, I go to museum, I sit in on little discussions with museum directors around the country at some of the things, some webinars I attend. And a lot of them realize now, especially when it comes to ethnic peoples, when it comes to people of color, they realize that museums have always been the colonial view from the top down, looking at what is happening. And it's always been one side and very colonial. I don't think I've heard the word colonial brought up more, say, in the last, 10 years. I mean, I know it's a thing. I know it was a function of how the Philippines.
You need to, okay, here comes a footnote. You need to read both Kevin Nadal and
Kevin Nadal.
EJR David's books.
Yes.
EJ's got about 4 out now. Kevin, I think, has got 2 or 3 out. And as I was saying earlier, history, there's a lot of psychology in how history happens. And there is definitely psychology in how politics happens.
Yeah. Well, EJ Ramos David, his books, I had him on a podcast. Kevin Nadal. Yeah. All, bringing that psychology and mixing it in and showing how it's relevant in history, and all in terms of the colonial mentality
Right.
exists in our community.
Right.
I mean,
Well,
I
that's a
mentioned,
whole nother conversation.
yes, another
But
conversation. I mentioned that in some of my writings in my columns in the 90s, maybe 2010, but nowhere near to the level of the scholarly level that those two have
whoa,
taken.
wow,
And
you froze
as
up
I
for a
mentioned it,
second.
I mentioned it as a, hey, colonial mentality, it's a thing. But they made it as a matter of, of it, from a scholarly perspective, something that I think would help us or help the Filipino community understand what's going on.
Well, there's the down here on the ground thing, and that's what FANHS is about.
Yeah,
it's down here on the ground. People, people, academics like EJ and Kevin and all of their friends and associates, right, nationally, and especially the people who were youngsters that came up because of FANHS, right? Yeah. They have this fun position, this really excellent position of trying to not only apply the hypotheses that come out of decolonization theory, right? Yeah. But they also are able to inform people about the elements of colonial mentality that affect the way we behave. And so this comes up when we talk about politics all the time, even historical politics. Why is it that the Philippine government was willing to, let's say, overlook the needs and considerations of the Filipinos that had settled into the United States before World War II? Why did they overlook that? And a lot of it is class. It's a class issue. And a lot of it was actually colonial because of the relationship between the United States and the Philippines, right? The territorial protectorate language was really just a euphemism for outright colony of the United States. So that has its effect. And as you said earlier, it still affects us now.
Oh, yeah.
The way Filipinos look at themselves, even in the Philippines, is affected by all of that colonial experience.
Yeah. And so now, one of the things that's happening today, there's a big cultural thing happening online. Young people, one of my goddaughters, part of it, she's a fashion type, and it's fashion and music and storytelling and all that. And it's mostly people in their 20s and 30s. How are they seeing themselves as Filipino?
Yeah. Yep.
Since most of them are they might be in that 1.5, right? They came as immigrants, they grew up in America, or maybe they're like my goddaughter who was born in the United States and slowly has evolved her understanding of Filipino, being Filipino, from seeing her parents struggle with the culture and society, and then seeing her own struggles and in society, and then meeting up with these younger, I don't want to say more vibrant, I just want to say more Filipino, because they've got more of that immigrant experience, which seems to be driving everything. So what do you make of that younger voice in our community now, Dan?
There's a lot of unity between 1.5s of the same age group.
Yeah.
Right. And the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth generation Filipino Americans, and they're both seeking the same information base. Yeah. They have the advantage of private institutions now paying a lot more attention to Filipino American history as they conduct their business. So,
wait, when you say private, you really mean corporate, right?
I also meant small cultural organizations that every location of Filipinos has. Once they establish an enclave, or better yet, an actual community, right, where there is a certain amount of economic, the presence of supermarkets, real estate agents, bankers, that kind of thing, right? That's what separates the notion of enclave where there's just a lot of people of a certain background living in a geographic location, in a
Yeah.
close, and then community, which means they actually have structures that give them a level of economic and political independence.
Well,
Right.
it's a small business
That's
entrepreneur,
right.
and you can see it when you go to LA and you go to Carson, you go to all those little places that aren't in. I don't know what L. I don't get LA. I was born in San Francisco, so I have a San Franciscan's view of LA, which is Dodgers, ugh, right, and Giants, good, but
Good,
but now,
good burritos,
but every time I go down to LA, I get a
cheap movie film.
better I get a better feeling for it when people say, "Hey, look, here's Carson. Here's look where the Filipinos hang out in Glendale. Look where the
Right, right,
Filipinos hang
right.
out." They're not in necessarily. You won't find them in the swanky, the places that you read about in People Magazine, that kind of thing. But they have their communities.
Right.
And their communities have a structure. There's businesses, there's schools, there's communities. There's I went to a FANHS online event that Ron Benaventura started a couple months ago, and they talked about these Filipino cultural nights that were
Right.
really major things that brought the community together. And here there were people 20 years after that, right, in their 30s, late 30s and 40s, thinking about being nostalgic about what brought them together. That's Filipino American history. Just like
Yep.
up here in Northern California, there are bands. People put up pictures of the Filipino bands that played in Northern California high school dances, and that brought Filipinos together in the 70s and 80s. I think
Even the 60s, even the 60s.
even the
Don't leave the
60s.
60s out, dude.
Yeah. Yeah, even the 60s. People weren't all into tie-dye and the Grateful Dead. They were, listening
Yeah.
to Revelers.
They were into they did both. They did three kinds of music, right? The bands, and they were combos. Right?
Combos. Oh,
So
yeah,
the
combos.
older generation had full bands and almost full orchestras. And then the younger generation had combos.
Combos.
That were usually 4 or 5. You were really cool if you had a fifth instrument, which was usually a sax.
But look,
you got the rhythm section, plus keyboards. That's it.
I bring this all up because this is all part of history. Look at, wherever you are geographically in the nation, or if you're watching this and you're, viewing from Canada, the Filipino Canadians, they've got a story.
Oh yeah.
They got a real story. And then, but we're in California. So the Filipino Californians, or the Filipinos here, I mean, it's an amazing story. Your lives, I like to say history is where you are, and your life is Filipino history, Filipino American history. So we cover a broad range of things. We haven't even gotten to the major parts of the politics yet. And by the time we're done with our conversation with Dan Gonzales, professor, San Francisco State, we'll talk about the origin story, because today, as we speak, is the 17th, but tomorrow is the 18th, and the 18th is a big day. It's not just, we talked about the origins of Filipino American History Month, how we get this second half all to ourselves of October, but the origins of why October 18th is important. We'll get to that story too. So, hey, so the pre-show is running a little long, I think, Dan.
Oh, man, are we still pre-showing? Okay, let's get to the real thing. Okay, what's on your list for the real thing? Come on.
All right. Here's the thing for the real thing. I want to talk about politics, because we've had a lot of news, and I'm gonna share my screen, because it's important I share my screen with you, but I don't have my screen up. Okay, I'm gonna do this here. There's been a lot of news, Dan, as you know.
Oh really?
I mean, a heck of a lot.
I got a new Post-it up that I'm put underneath your picture, man, and it's a master of understatement.
Look, the thing is, you always wonder where are Filipinos in this thing, And
Totally.
how excited are Filipinos? And then you look at the polls, and they never break it down for people about people of color, you know, especially Filipinos. They never break it down that far because there's never enough of a sample, right? And I always like to go to AAPI data because they do these surveys. They do a national survey and they do a California survey. We talked about the national survey the last time you were on, and they surveyed people by phone from July to September to get a sense of where Asian Americans were, and they have the crosstabs where you can say, well, what do Filipinos think? How do they compare with others? And now it's data. It's part of the historical record. Let's bring in Dan and let's talk about this and see what it means. So I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, share my screen.
You're talking about the APIA data sources.
APIA data,
Yeah,
yes.
right.
Did I misspeak there? I apologize for that. So here we are. This is the AAPI data. This is the California one. And here's a question. Compared to previous elections, are you more enthusiastic than usual about voting this year or less enthusiastic? Asian Americans were more enthusiastic, 54%, more in California. I mean, it's really up, but look at when I look at the crosstabs. Filipinos through the roof.
Well,
62% said more
don't
enthusiastic.
get too excited, you know.
Well,
That's
compared
good.
to other
You know, that's good. And
compared to other Asians, I mean,
comparatively, it's very good that we're up there in the same proportion
yeah,
as Japanese Americans, because Japanese Americans have a much lower immigration rate, right?
yeah,
Very low Japanese immigration to the United States. So they have a very well developed American history, right? Japanese American history. And they, because of the internment during World War II,
yeah,
tend to have a many decades long, multi-generational perspective, critical perspective on American politics. So if we're in there in numbers that are comparable, and even in this instance, exceed the Japanese American numbers, okay, about enthusiasm, that's really good.
that's good.
That's
I
an
mean, so
excellent thing.
when you see people say, "Oh, Filipinos are apathetic. Filipinos don't care,"
Not no
uh,
more, baby. Can't say
I
that
know
stuff anymore.
this is like I said, the AAPI data survey, the Asian American Voter Survey 2020, the California edition. We talked about the national one a couple of weeks ago, but this is the California survey. Now here's another one: vote in person, vote absentee by mail, vote in person on election day. Don't know. There's a lot of talk that something's going to go wrong with the election in terms of challenging and your vote being considered not, somehow, not valid. I voted this week, even though I'm a permanent vote by mail guy.
Right.
People are
You went
saying,
in?
yeah, I went in. I masked up. People say, you know, people say, plan your vote. So I say, okay, I'm not doing anything today. I'm going to go down. We're down, masked up. There were like 7 people there, but I voted in person. I made sure my vote would count. Do you think that's important this year? Look, 70% in California, Asian Americans. And the same, it sort of holds true with Filipinos in California, but it's lesser in New York, lesser in other states, but a lot more in California. Vote by mail. Do you think the
Right,
Asian
right.
Americans should be voting by mail or should be voting in person this time out?
I think whichever you feel most comfortable with. New York. I'm surprised at New York. They should have a much higher vote by mail count because they had the worst record initially for COVID-19,
Right.
and they're starting to have a little bit of a spike now. However, they've done a better job than almost any other state on when there's a flare up, addressing the flare up and keeping it down. They're starting to talk about the fact, though, that people are getting loose because they see that the COVID-19 rate of infection is down, and also, but the rate of hospitalization is slightly up. So you got to watch all of those numbers. You can't just look at one and say, the threats diminished to the point where I needn't worry, and therefore I can vote in person and vote in person on election day. What I don't want to think is that that's indicative of a Republican surge vote, because the Republicans are saying, don't vote by mail because it's crooked, except in Florida.
Well, I think this is the thing. A lot of Republicans are trying to vote by mail, and it's a contradictory message when you have Trump saying that, the mail ballots are wrong. I just think this is part of his chaos method of just throwing anything out there and trying to confuse the public. But I have to admit,
there's too much credit given to these people for creating chaos. I think what you're seeing is two conflicting ways of trying to conduct a campaign, and people within his own campaign seeing the man as really not being able to have. He doesn't have the discipline to stick to a plan.
Yeah.
And so I'm not surprised by any of this stuff, but to think, I hear too many people in the media, yourself, accepted, saying this man is he loves to do chaos, as though there's actually a logic to his madness in terms of the chaos. Yeah. There's a very small percentage of that chaos that is actually the logical outcome of a plan. Yeah. So I don't like giving people like that credit.
Well, I just want to point out that I voted in person. I felt a lot good. I also voted ahead of, I voted early. All this is now entertainment to me. I mean, I am not. My vote is cast, but I want people to know that we're not endorsing any position. We're just we want you to vote. Who you vote for is up to you.
Yeah, but we just want them to vote. That was I think my last or second to the last tweet was just effing vote.
Yeah, I mean, really, that's kind of the thing. But like I said, to me, it's like I'm doing all this now is for entertainment purposes now, because.
Well, what was it before it became entertainment?
I'm really serious about this stuff. Well, as a reporter,
so that means you read like crazy, right?
As a reporter, I researched and I tried to figure out, well, what am I going to say when I put together my journalistic commentary with it on the Inquirer.net or on the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund site. I mean, I write for numerous publications around the country, so I just. I can relax a little bit, but I just want to point out this vote by mail. All right, now let's go to party identification.
Did you read? Okay, one of the things that I say in my classes is the problem with democracy is it takes work.
Yeah, it does.
Even voting. Mm-hmm. And I said, and recent developments, particularly the abuse of the initiative process.
Oh yeah.
Okay, makes it even harder. Because it becomes very difficult to actually understand what the intention is for a given proposition against the possibility of the actual outcomes. It's very difficult to see that. So there's a lot of unintended consequences, even from the best propositions, because so many of them are initiatives. They bypass the legislature and the governor entirely. It's all up to the electorate.
Well, this is the thing about direct democracy, and this is where direct history is better than direct democracy. This is what I call this direct history. Direct democracy is bad because, like you said, it bypasses our representatives, the legislature. They should be doing the work, and I don't want them to get away with not doing the work. And the other thing is, when you bypass the legislature, you leave a greater chance for manipulation by moneyed interest. And you talk about the propositions, just like that
You're starting to sound like a left winger there, Emil.
Well, no, I'm talking about, look, let's talk about the legislature doing the work, and let's talk about getting laws.
Yeah, but see, Emil, don't forget, a lot of people in the legislature are cooperating with people out in the community, and especially business interests, to make those initiatives. They actually are involved in the process.
Okay,
and they're trying to get around the other party by coming up with initiatives and putting those before the public.
Then it's up to people like you and me to talk about it so people know what's going on. Look,
yeah, but then when we do it, we get labeled liberals. You
know, no, we're not. All we need to do is shine the light, and I'm not talking about the ring light you have on your computer, but we need to shine the light on what's going on so people know when they're the puppets or they're the puppeteer, right? I mean, that was a good image that was brought up by Senator Sheldon Whitehouse at the Amy Coney Barrett hearings, that, hey, you know, what you're seeing is a puppet show. There's stuff going on.
Yeah, I liked Whitehouse. Coons was really good. I thought Harris was good too on the second. She was. She just wasn't as pointed. She wasn't as pointed.
The second day, she prosecuted Barrett and got something out. Anyway, look, let's talk about that when we talk about the news part. Let's talk about party identification. And we'll also talk about propositions like 16 and 22 in California, because big money's in 22 and 16 is just confusing as heck. But people should need to know how before they make their own choice. Party identification. Look at this in California. Asian American, 50% Democrat, 28% Republican, and 22% independent. That's sort of the base. Look where the Filipinos are. 48, which is close to the 50, 30, close to the Asian American, and 20. So we actually almost mirror the Asian American, Asian Americans who were surveyed.
Yeah.
We're not as liberal as the Japanese or as democratic. We're not as democratic as the Korean even, nor as the Chinese.
But we're more democratic than the Vietnamese, that's pretty much par for the course. I believed this layout. I believe this, the newest players, right, in large numbers are the Asian Indians.
Yeah. And look, we're even more Democrat than
the Asian Indians. Yeah.
The Asian Indians. The Asian
they have a very strong Republican and independent element.
Yeah. I'm just saying that when people see these polls, they rarely see political polls that show Asians in any way. They'll just generalize. True. They'll make it plus or minus 15 or 20 because
which is why we both contribute to APIA, and
APIA.
Because they get together and they do these polls because you got to take care of your own. That's always been the story, by the way. We should cover that sometime.
Yeah, polling.
How did we get on the map? And the answer is people from our community financed efforts like this one to put us on the map, to give us the information that we need. Because we can't do it. We can't do it at the university alone because we keep getting cut back on our funding. And so then we have to go and apply to the private and public funding sources. And then when you show that you're going to do, politically oriented work, you get suspicious right away. People get suspicious of you right away,
Well, I just want to, we're doing this at the museum to show the historical snapshot of where Filipinos are based on probably the most significant political poll out there, where Filipinos are in 2020. Would you say this is fairly accurate though? The 48%?
I definitely would. Not only for the Filipinos, relative to others. That's one of the things that I like about how they did the research. And then when you look at the questions that they asked, what are their baseline questions and what are their more specific questions, they're really great question sets. Right. You're not going to get good answers if you don't have good questions. And so they do their job very, very well. Now, as far as Filipinos and this split goes, of course, I'm not unhappy that we're 48% Democrat, because there's a lot of things to be criticized about Democratic Party positions. and about the way that certain Democrats behave. Look at the flack that Senator Feinstein is taking right now,
Oh yeah,
because of what she did on the Coney Barrett hearings.
we mean the embrace
She,
of Lindsey Graham.
well, that was what most people criticize her for. I was criticizing her even as she was asking her question set of the judge,
Yeah,
because most of the questions that she was asking, see, lawyers have an old saying. This is one of many, and that is never ask a question that you don't already know the answer to.
right.
Okay. And you can ask my wife, I was criticizing the fact that her preppers, whoever her staff is, didn't do a good enough job in understanding and anticipating that Coney Barrett was going to use the escape hatch.
Yeah.
The standard escape hatches, these are issues that are going to likely come up. And if I'm appointed, and I take a seat, these are things that I cannot disclose a preposition on, because I have to consider the facts and the law as it stands at the time the cases come in. She's going to do that all the time. And the irony is that she cited our RBG, right?
Well, Feinstein, by the benefit of being the senior Democrat, is that she speaks first, right after Lindsey Graham, and
ranking member,
I thought she did okay, but she didn't get any answers. She showed her disappointment.
Well, I just told you why.
Yeah,
I just told you why she didn't get any answers.
But I was surprised that at the end, before she hugged Lindsey Graham, she said these were some of the best hearings, or the best hearing I've ever been a part of. And I thought, wow, what is she talking about? So I don't.
It's time for her to get off. It's time for her to get off.
Well, this is the thing. When I see these numbers and I see how Filipinos are kind of like, there's a lot of gray area here. The 22% independent.
I like the independent. I like the fact that they're 22%.
I'm just saying that when Feinstein is up again, she barely got past Senator De Leon, this time around.
I don't think we ought to wait.
I don't think it. I'm sort of.
If Biden Harris win, then the governor gets to pick somebody to substitute for Harris. Okay, and so we need to do that. But at the same time, I think the party. I'm going to work on this. The party has to put pressure on Feinstein to step aside, and we'll give her the first rights to nominate a few people of her own regard. But she's got to step off.
We don't take a stand here, of course, but I will say this: the reason why I like old people, the reason why I like old people in political positions is because they have seniority, and seniority means something in our government. And that's not a political side, and that's not taking any sides based on politics. It's chronologically, seniority matters. And
whether or not, well, here it is. Whether or that's true. But
give up seniority.
Seniority has also gotten a lot of us in trouble. I mean, there were people on when the issues were not so bad that every day you've got the president of the United States trying to take up TV time.
Yeah.
The people paid more attention to things like ecological issues and especially climate change. But you got older people on the Senate that were denying climate change, denying that humans are a factor, that human behavior actually produces climate change. Then they throw snowballs on the Senate floor. That's some crazy stuff, man.
All right. I don't know if I wouldn't put necessarily Feinstein in that camp. Or look, let's just show that the fact that Filipinos have a voice, and it's a broad voice, and it's going to be a factor.
You want to hear my Feinstein story when she was mayor?
No, not yet. Let's move on.
Come on, man.
Let's move on. Look, thinking about the upcoming November election for president. If the election were being held today, would you be inclined to vote for Biden is blue, Trump is red, and I don't know. This was taken in between July and September, so I don't know if I don't know is still in play. Do you think there's that many I don't knows out there? Because look where the Filipinos are. The Filipinos are 52 Biden, 32 Trump,
Yeah, well, is the I don't know response I really have considered both sides and I still don't know, or is it I just haven't gotten around to trying
It
to
could
nail
be
it
a
down
lot.
yet, you know?
It could be both. It could be both. But I think what this is saying is the Filipino uh, makeup is similar to the Asian American makeup. Look at this, though. We were talking about the Filipinos versus the very democratic Asians. Look how significantly the Asian Indians
And the
are
Asian
divided.
Indians have a conservative streak that is a little bigger
Yeah,
than, especially among younger people, you know, between 20 and 40.
yeah,
They've got a conservative streak. They're they're pro Modi, right?
yeah.
There's
Yeah.
a lot of South Asian immigrants that are pro Modi.
And look at the Chinese. The Chinese 62.
Yeah,
10 points higher than the Filipinos. The Japanese more than the Filipinos. So same with the Koreans. Here's where the Filipinos and the Vietnamese are on the low end of the Biden supporters, and
right.
maybe they're on the high end, right? Just second to the Vietnamese in terms of Trump supporters.
Well,
So
I have you looked at the question set for this, because I don't know if they did they ask a religion question at all?
I think there is, yeah. I think
Okay,
there is a religion question, but
yeah,
maybe
well,
that
we gotta
is
take a look at that.
Yeah, maybe that is the reason why there is as many Trump supporters. But
Yeah.
now, historically, you look at this, Dan. How would this and
They
the,
also cite the economy. They believe in the mythology of Trump being, the savior of the U.S. economy, and
right?
they believe the mythology that the stock market is indicative of the health of the economy.
Okay, but look, tapping into your Filipino American history knowledge of the electorate, in years past, how would you compare this snapshot of Filipino Americans, this historical snapshot, compared to, previous years, previous
I think
elections?
it was much more Republican in the past.
Really?
I think there was fewer Democrats. It depends on the era, because it would go up and down.
Yeah.
Um, uh, One of the things that I talk about in my class is that Marcos, even during martial law, was very popular. You know, he was less popular in the Philippines, but he was more popular outside of the Philippines, including the United States. He was very popular.
Yeah.
So the anti-Marcos movement was really a minority movement, even after the assassination of Aquino. However, there was enough critical mass developed on the anti-Marcos side to take it for them to take advantage, or at least take the risk that there could be a removal of Marcos if they went back and participated in the snap elections. And
Yeah.
so there was this mass remigration, right?
Yeah.
Of a particular class of people. Obviously they weren't the working class, and very few of them were middle class. We're talking about upper middle class and upper class expatriates, the people who call themselves expatriates, right? Um, I don't know. I've seen some people recently refer to virtually all Filipinos in the United States as expatriates, and I
Ah.
thought, oh no,
Well,
that's
we have
that's
to
so
stop.
wrong.
We have to stop saying, "Oh, when I go back home," when home is still here in America. Home is
Yeah.
not Manila. All right. Let me ask you this: there was an article in the Washington Post recently that said 40% of Americans really want an authoritarian government, and
Yes,
this kind of mirrors
I
where
agree.
Filipinos, because of Marcos and Duterte, they're kind of models for authoritarian, behavior by a political leader. Uh, would you would you see this? That would mean that maybe this number should be higher, huh? The 32% who are pro-Trump.
I don't know. I think that's true that America like has a lot of people who are accepting of authoritarianism, and I think Filipinos clearly have a history of that. And I'm going to quote somebody, another mutual friend of ours, Renee P. Syria Cruz.
Oh yeah,
He made a comment last year at at a discussion about art and critical art and politics. that was, well, anyway, both of us were attending the same event. And I was getting ready to make a statement when suddenly from behind me, somebody referred to the Filipino tendency to look for a single, even authoritarian leader. And he called it the Messiah complex. And my neck snapped around because I've been calling it that for a while. And I don't recall ever having that kind of a conversation with Renee. But he made a statement that was exactly congruent with the statement that I was going to make. And so,
wait a minute, wait. Explain the Messiah, meaning Filipinos
they
want to have
they
someone
have a
save us.
tendency to look for somebody, an individual figure who's going to save them.
Well, EMIL, capital GUILL. Okay, just kidding. Just kidding.
Yeah, they're looking for somebody to save them, and that's where they place their
trust.
Duterte is so popular. You know, he's done all kinds of things that are clearly immoral, unethical, and would be illegal if he wasn't president of the Philippines. Yeah. And they cheer him on. You know, they love Trump in the Philippines.
So maybe it's here in the United States, the Trump the Biden number is 52-32.
Yeah, that's not bad.
Well,
I think that's a significant improvement over the previous years. You know, I think I mentioned that the actual founder of the Philippines Mail, and I have evidence of him being the editor-publisher in like 1921, which predates most of the other scholarship on the studies on the Philippines Mail, but was my granduncle, Venerando C. Gonzales, my father's uncle. And he was a Republican. And he was a really hard-bitten Republican, but he was of the traditional conservative type. So we would have arguments all the time. When he was in town, he'd stay at our house. And I was continually having arguments with him, even into my teen years when I was attending a Jesuit school here in San Francisco. And they were good, strong arguments. He was making good, principled arguments, you know.
Hey, Dan, let me ask you, this number, this poll was taken, it ended in September 30th. We're like a month or less than a month now since then. Do you think the events that have happened since September,
that's a
coronavirus, Trump getting coronavirus, the super spreader, we've had the debate, we've had the second town hall, we've had the vice presidential debate, we've had the Pence fly. Has any of that, do you think, changed this number, you think?
Very slightly, if at all.
Yeah.
Very slightly, if at all. Yeah, I just think there's very little effect. I think most people already made up their minds what they were going to do maybe months ago, even before Mr. Trump got coronavirus.
Yeah.
Came down with it and it infected, you know, a lot of his staff and his, you know, I'm amazed that his cabinet members, you know, aren't more infected, that there's greater numbers of them. But very little effect.
All right, let's move on to this one. Favorability toward Joe Biden. Very favorable is blue, light blue is somewhat favorable. And then you got to look at the orange, somewhat unfavorable. And then the lighter yellows, haven't heard of, don't know enough about, very unfavorable. Here's what it is with the very favorable. 32% Asian American, and the Filipinos are, you know, not quite very favorable. They were okay. This suggests that there's a kind of a lukewarm sense about Biden. Yeah. Is that your feeling out there? And is that?
Yeah. And I think there's a different reason for that. It goes in a different direction. Rather than looking at immigrants as leaning towards conservative positions, right? That's a general rule. You know, first generation immigrants tend to take conservative positions, okay, in general. And I'm talking about traditional conservatism. I'm not talking about Trumpism, okay? So if you compare Filipinos to Japanese, there's a really high number of Japanese Americans with a somewhat favorable position. And I'll tell you why. They're more progressive than the only other group that matches up with Japanese Americans in terms of the population that lean towards liberal and progressive is Asian Indian.
Right.
And if the Japanese Americans are showing that kind of a split, okay,
Yeah.
it'll tell you that they were looking for somebody more progressive, and they might have been Sanders.
Yeah,
Favorite.
Biden tends to be, if you're a Democrat, Biden tends to be the kind of like, oh, well, yeah, we just got to get out of this situation, and he's the
Yeah,
guy.
yeah, exactly.
And so that's what this picture shows.
Yeah.
Let's go to favorability toward Donald Trump, and as you can see, the most favorable among Asian Americans are Vietnamese, and then
Well, you gotta look at yeah.
and then there's the Filipino.
Right.
And
I was surprised by the very unfavorable
of
among
the Chinese.
among
Yeah.
the Chinese. Yeah.
Yeah.
Among the Korean, I could understand that. We're talking about South Korea. We're talking about Trump, continually complimenting
Yeah.
the
Well, look,
Northerners.
the thing about the Chinese, you're right. And you look at Trump's foreign positions, and he calls it, and even the use of the term China flu.
Oh yeah,
And
that's a good one.
yeah, you'd think that maybe this would be even more,
Yeah,
but and then the Koreans, they're right up there.
yeah.
Or
Right
actually,
up there.
the Japanese are unfavorable because they have a more liberal base,
They have a
a more
tendency. Yeah.
progressive base, and it's the Filipinos. We're down there with we're less unfavorable, but not
Right.
less unfavorable than the Vietnamese.
Right. We're okay. We're with the general mode, with the Asian
The
mode.
Asian.
That's all right.
All right, let's look
All
at
right.
now. Here's one thing
We
about
haven't talked about gender and sexuality yet, but that's also another issue.
yeah.
So,
Well, I'm going in the order of the slides, unfortunately here, but
yeah, okay.
look at this: contacted by either party. Some, not at all. 40. That's a big number there. There's a lot of
Yeah,
people.
for Asians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so in some ways, by doing this in an historical context, how we look at politics, or how Asian Americans, how Filipino Americans look at politics, we want to emerge and have an impact. We got to be contacted by the parties. We got to get involved. And here we have 41% say no one's contacted them. That's not good.
Yeah,
All right,
that's not. We're being overlooked. Yeah.
let's go to issues. Jobs and economy are the most important issues for the November election, and it is 80% say very important to extremely important. I think there's a breakdown here.
Yeah, but you got to take that with a grain of salt, because some people still believe that Trump is good for the economy.
Well, that's true. That's true. I mean, there's that, as you say, that myth. I'm trying to go to the crosstabs. Oh, I think I pulled out the one that didn't have. Oh, yeah.
There it is.
Well, here's one of them. But this is
Stricter
about
gun laws.
stricter gun laws in America. We're for gun laws. Asian
Yeah,
Americans are for
but
gun laws.
not as strong as everybody else. I find the Vietnamese position really interesting.
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of Vietnamese men who are really
Pro-gun.
I would say multiple gun owners, and they tend towards buying militaristic military style weapons and all that. So yeah, we're pretty good.
Yeah.
There are Filipinos who fall, the men who fall into the not necessarily gun nut, but gun defense, Second Amendment types. And a lot of them are ex-military.
Right. Well, I'm just bringing this up just as to show some of the issues that they brought. Now, here's a crosstab on climate change and global warming. It seems
I'm really happy with the Filipino demonstration here, and I think some of that is first generation immigrant driven, because the Philippines, it's not, you can't brag about 7,000 islands anymore.
Well, one of the things I was watching some Asian news, and the fishnets and the seas and hurting the birds and the plastics, and you know and that's just one aspect, right,
Yeah.
of the whole global warming climate
Yep.
change issue. And then you mentioned the islands, the water's rising. I don't know if it's really sunk in here in America as much or as it should be, and we're still already at 80% say we have to do something.
That's largely because of the petroleum industry's hold on the media.
Yeah.
Their influence on the media, and especially their influence on conservatives. I hate calling it conservative media because it's not really very conservative. It's rather radically right.
It's just, well, there is a corporate media in general, and then there's Fox, which is sort of corporate and ideological.
Well, there's
And
on the radio, Sinclair.
oh yeah, Sinclair. Well, Sinclair's everywhere. Television too. They
Yeah,
have all these television properties. I don't know. I think that's why I think Facebook, I think the social media, these platforms, live streaming, this is really the future in terms of democratization. We don't have to go for the big audience. We don't need millions of people to watch. We can deal with, maybe a few hundred, maybe 1,000 or so checking in and binge watching the information that we give. Well, let's move on to this one here, because BLM, Black Lives Matter, is important. The government should do more. Equal rights, blacks and whites. This is funny because the question is posed to an Asian American audience, but look at how the government should do more. Filipinos or Asian Americans in general aren't really. Oh no, they agree. Most of them agree. Most people agree.
yeah, and
The disagree.
Filipinos are comparable.
Yeah, yeah. I was reading this
Filipinos are
wrong.
comparable. I'm kind of surprised at the neither agree nor disagree, but then I shouldn't be. I would think that would be a little smaller, and even the disagree would be a little larger. I wouldn't think it would make them more blue. I'm also surprised by the Asian Indian.
Yeah,
That's huge.
yeah. 88% agreeing. Everyone should be at 88%, right? I
Yeah,
mean, because what this number,
ideally, yes.
yeah, what this number suggests is that Asian Indians have a solidarity with blacks and whites in terms of equal rights, and maybe it has to do with skin color. Maybe it has to do with, um, you know,
I think their experiences, which
yeah,
also goes back to skin color. I think
yeah,
I think there's two things that work strongly against Asian Indians around racism, right? And
right,
one is skin color, and the other one is accents and language usage. So in that regard, they have the same kind of problem that Filipinos who are first generation immigrants who have accents have, right? And they still get discriminated against. I mean, the last San Francisco case was probably more than 10 years ago,
yeah,
but the fact that they occur at all, around accents, right?
yeah.
The big Filipino case was, of course, the late 1980s case that came out of Honolulu,
Oh, yeah. You
the
mean
Fragante case. Yeah,
the Fragante case? I talk about that in my show. It was an accent show or
yeah.
an accent case. The Supreme Court wouldn't hear it.
No,
The
no.
Supreme Court,
And the bad thing about that was the district court decision didn't give a clear set of criteria on what constitutes problematic understanding of an accent. What is there about accents that are problematic to the unfamiliar ear? They gave no criteria for that. And so that allows employers just to say, we got complaints and people couldn't understand them. And a lot of people who complain about accents really can understand the person who's talking to them. They're just irritated by the fact the guy's got an accent and a job.
and didn't learn English. That's the other thing. The
Yeah,
reason
that's the
why,
assumption.
yeah, I mean, but the assumption is that, hey, immigrant, learn English. I mean, that's and that's a kind of a xenophobic kind of
Well, I got
thing.
treated that way right here in San Francisco.
Oh yeah, Yeah.
And you know, I gave them the familiar single digit salute and the matching verbiage, and I
Yeah.
said, "How's that for an
Yeah.
accent?"
Well, look at this. Neither agree nor disagree. People in the middle. A third.
Yeah,
A
yeah,
third
that's
are like,
interesting.
hey, whatever happens, bahala na, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that,
that's
I mean,
actually there's an argument around bahalana. You know, the colloquial use of the term bahalana means just let whatever. You know, fate is what it is, right? But there's an argument by some people, including gentlemen that were in those units during the Second World War, who said, "No, man, we were challenging fate. We were challenging fate."
yeah,
So there it is. I mean, you know, there are two different versions of history, but both of them come from the people closest to the experience. You know.
yeah. Well, this is an interesting question, like I said, because the government should do more equal
Yeah.
rights, blacks and whites, and they ask it of Asians, and it shows our solidarity. Here's another question, similar: affirmative action to help black people, women, other minorities access higher education.
Now this is a much more complex question, and I can see, you know, problems with it. Um,
I mean, you see where Filipinos
yeah,
favor.
the biggest section besides favor,
Yeah,
which is good, right,
yeah,
is don't know.
don't know. 28.
Yeah,
And look how, and we're the largest don't knows.
that's right.
We're the
Which is
largest
really
don't
interesting,
knows,
right?
and
Which
we're
is
the
really
biggest.
interesting because a lot of people, I think a lot of people feel that the greatest resistance that I got to talking about affirmative action is from people who feel that they got where they got on their own merit. And that's really the counter argument to affirmative action is merit only arguments. That's the extreme, you know, conservative position, merit only.
I
And
can
there's a
do it on
lot of
my own.
Asians. There's a lot of Asian Americans who inhabit the merit only argument. Once
Right.
again, look at the Asian Indians, though. That kind of matches up with an earlier
Yeah.
uh,
They favor affirmative
metric.
action.
Yep.
And there's no question.
Yeah.
There's no I
They're
don't
in no
know.
challenge. Yeah.
No, I don't know about it. Uh, but there, and the next, the Vietnamese, the conservative Vietnamese favor affirmative action, which
And
is
I think that's a result of their, once again, their own experiences. That I think first generation and second generation Vietnamese immigrants are very familiar with discrimination.
yeah,
Not so much that they couldn't get jobs, but there was a limitation on the kind of jobs they could get.
yeah.
You
Now
know?
look at the opposition to this, though. The leading opponents turn out to be the Koreans.
Yeah,
Korean,
Koreans are, yeah, they're high on merit only.
do it myself. I can do
Yeah,
it. I do it on my
we
own.
got it. We and you know, they're high on independent businesses. So you know, it's kind of interesting, right? Because there's two groups of people here who have a lot of small business background, right?
Right.
And the Koreans are one, and Chinese are another. That's very traditional, right?
Yeah.
And Asian Indians also have very high, right, small
Yeah.
business
Hey,
engagement.
yeah. Keep in mind, this is affirmative action to gain access to higher education, and which is, that's Prop 16. The Chinese are really heavily against it, and so you see they're up there 28, but not as much as the Koreans. So
They're very much like Koreans. I
yeah,
mean, you know, in attitude. That's
yeah,
what I'm saying.
and,
They may have slightly lower numbers,
yeah,
but their attitude is very much merit only.
yeah, and
They were involved in a number of lawsuits that were against affirmative action, even admissions to high school, and the Lowell case.
yeah.
Gee, somebody I know, you know, may be very familiar with that school. But
Well, I didn't know that. I came before the Lowell. I know Lowell when it was pure, but it was,
you mean when it was Jewish?
well, no one batted an eyelash when it was growing in terms of its Asian Jewish numbers, and it
Oh,
was only
no, don't say that.
It was
There
only
were several attempts. There were several
no. It was
attempts.
after I left, after I graduated.
Okay.
That's when the move happened.
What?
And
Well, see, well, see,
I'm
you're
talking post. It happened in the '70s. It happened in the '70s, late
right.
'70s.
That's right. That's right.
Late '70s. I was there slightly earlier. Anyway, look, let's move on to the big one, which, as it, the Prop 16 in California, reinstate affirmative action, repeal ban on affirmative action in education, government hiring, and public contracting. People, historically, there's a proposition called 209,
That's
which
right.
banned affirmative action back in '95, I believe. And this is one of the things about,
And it was extremely restrictive. I
right?
mean, you couldn't count. You couldn't count a public or private institution.
Yeah.
Could not even count
It was
how many people of whatever ethnicity or gender or sexuality they had among their employees.
right. The law was clear, it was banned, and yet the law was clear, but what people were voting for wasn't necessarily clear because it
Right,
was called
exactly.
the Civil Rights Amendment and
The California Civil Rights Initiative.
yeah, but it amended the Constitution, and now here's this Prop 16, and I've covered this as a reporter. All the efforts to try to repeal 209. It has not been good. It has not been positive, and in terms of they haven't been able to do it. They're on the ballot now. I mean, you all remember there was a Senate Bill 5, which tried to repeal, and it got really it got chased off the. It just didn't get far because of a strong Asian American bias against the law. And here, if you look at this, there is how many people want to reinstate? The no's are very strong among Chinese, Korean, Japanese, Filipino. Very small no's, big yes, but a lot of undecided.
That's pretty good. I mean, it's about where I think Filipinos are.
Yeah. Well, it also
again, the undecided is good because I read the 16 text, and my wife read the 16 text itself, and we both had to question each other. And I'm the guy with the law and political science background, but we had to question each other on what's going on.
Well, it's not clear. And people just need to know that a yes vote would reinstate and a no vote keeps it the same. And I just don't know. It just seems like there's a lot of undecideds going into the final week, and this isn't even as big an issue really for some people as you think it should be or would be. But what do you think, Dan? You're in public education. Has it hurt public education's effect of reaching, say, more diversity? Except
I think it did.
Levels?
It depends on the institutions. I think it definitely did.
Yeah.
For some of the private institutions like Stanford, and I think it did for the UC system. The CSU system got around that. The different campuses had different ways of putting diversity placing diversity as a major priority. And so they found different ways to be able to bring people in. But the UC system, of course, is not just the site of statewide competition. It is actually the site of global competition. Yeah. And so that makes a big difference. So one of the reasons that campuses wanted to limit affirmative action was to be able to attract foreign students because they can get more tuition out of foreign. They charge more for out of state, out of country foreign students. And so there was an intentional attempt, even at my home campus at San Francisco State, to set up policies and programs where they could admit whole cohorts of students from China and India, particularly India.
Yeah. What would you think?
They could charge them as foreign students.
Well, I know the foreign student thing has been a big boondoggle for universities and colleges to get higher tuition rates. But tell me, do you think that there'd be benefit to Filipinos if affirmative action were reinstated?
Once again, it
Because
depends on the institutions,
yeah,
but for the UC system and the private institutions, yes,
yeah.
definitely.
So I don't know. We're not trying to sway anybody. We're just trying to present the facts and present this snapshot of where people are. If you're in
Well,
California, this is Prop
what
16.
we did, okay, the first time that affirmative action for any Asian American groups came up and there was a strong movement to remove certain ethnic groups from affirmative action was in the late 70s, early 80s.
Right.
And one of the members of the regents, the UC systems regents, was Yori Wada, who's a community leader from San Francisco. And his son, Rich, was a good friend. He was a striker. He graduated from SF State. I don't know where his sister graduated from. I don't know if she graduated from SF State. But anyway, there was a connection between Yori, his son, SF State. And he was definitely a liberal, right? A progressive person appointed by Jerry Brown on his first 8-year tour. And the issue of affirmative action came up and people were challenging very strongly affirmative action for Asian Americans because so many of them were being admitted under regular admissions. So by the early 1980s, there were large numbers, it was of Chinese and Japanese Americans particularly, that were gaining admission to UC schools overall. And they were gaining admissions especially for the three most highly desirable campuses, which was Berkeley, UCLA, and Davis, okay? So Yori was confronted with pressure against having Japanese and Chinese on affirmative action in any way, because so many of them were entering the campus as competitors under the standard criteria, okay? And so then the question came to Filipino Americans, or how about Filipino Americans? And it was sometime around 82, 83 that I actually had occasion to speak to Yori about the issue. And he simply took out a sheaf of papers that showed what the rationale was for taking Filipinos off affirmative action. Yeah. And I simply said to him, okay, you're showing me work that shows that they're entering the campus in numbers that were as high as their graduating numbers from high school, or even higher than the percentage of high school graduates in the state of California. So you're using that as a comparison. I said, well, where's your data on how they're doing in the second and third years? Because if you look at graduation rates, they're not graduating at the rates that Chinese and Japanese Americans are graduating. And he didn't say anything to me. He didn't respond to that at all. And so he responded by an action at the Regents, which was to give Filipinos provisional inclusion on affirmative action, depending on how many entered in the next admission year. Okay, so if it showed a clear decline by a significant measure, let's say, one relative to Filipino admission, if you call last year's standard 100%, if there's a 25, 30% decline, we'll put them back on provisional affirmative action. That decline occurred. It's as simple as that. And so they were put back on provisional affirmative action. And ever since then, we've been started doing this cha-cha. For affirmative action
because
in the UC system.
We're not included, and that's been the complaint, that at UCs we're not generally included, right?
Yeah, well, what about Stanford? Same thing there.
Stanford, yeah.
And
so it's one of those things, and the only real argument against affirmative action is you say, hey, I can do it on my own.
Yeah.
I got to be good.
Well, that's at the individual level. That's at the individual level. At the institutional or community level, a more organized position, it's merit only. That's always their argument, merit only. And one of the reasons that Chinese, Japanese, and Asian Indians haven't done it yet, but Chinese and Japanese, one of the reasons they're so in favor of merit only is because by previous traditional standards, they outperformed white people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. They outperform white people in terms of meeting admission criteria to the UCs and the big private institutions.
So we're going to have to
take those positions.
We're going to have to see how Prop 16 in California works out, but people should know historically Filipinos have been helped by affirmative action.
Absolutely.
Let me go to a couple.
I think a lot of Filipinos don't understand. What's going on?
I'm sharing my screen.
Oh, okay.
This is another thing.
A lot of Filipinos don't understand different forms of affirmative action.
Yeah.
Okay. There are different levels and forms of affirmative action. It doesn't mean you get a free ride just because of your race or your ethnicity.
Right.
It means you get fair consideration. It means you get fair consideration. So all you want is to get fair consideration, not special treatment. Right?
That is a good point, because I don't think people understand that just because you get fair consideration doesn't mean they're going to push you through the door. It doesn't mean that you go through the door. It just means they show you the door, and whether you walk through is really kind of up to you. You can you could be a beneficiary of affirmative action and get nothing out of the deal because they say sink or swim. It's up to you. They take a laissez-faire effect. Well, that really is an issue. That's an issue about how affirmative action is good or bad. Historically, it has been the remedy to make up for the fact that we haven't been there. We haven't shown up. We haven't been a part of things that we've been left out.
I think once again, let's go back to psychology. The psychology of that kind of identity is we don't want to look like we need it. I think for a lot of Filipinos, they're very defensive about, what's called mukha, right? Face. They're very defensive. Yeah, mukha. Yeah, exactly. How outward appearance, right? So on the extreme end, we have the behavior in Tagalog. It's called palabas. Right? Demonstrative behavior. So people buy the hot, expensive European car, even though they're not living in such a great neighborhood because appearance of value. Right?
I want Honda. No. They want the expensive. They want the expensive Cadillac.
No, I had
SUV.
even upper middle class people that I still know them, but they'll recognize this if they ever watch this stuff. But they're in San Francisco, so the likelihood is they don't have that much interest in what we're doing at Stockton. But
this is worldwide. We're global, man. We're global.
Hey, okay. Well, they have access, but I'm saying, do they have interest? But they may from now on. I don't know. But I was on the tennis courts one day, and we were just getting ready to leave, and Linda and I were out playing. And as we were leaving, we ran into people that we knew since high school, right? And we're already well into our jobs. And I was just maybe second year law school, right? And so my prospects were looking good, if I made it out the door of Hastings, okay. But anyway, these other two couples arrived, and they're very closely related, both husbands and wives. And when they were getting ready to play, one of the husbands said, "Oh, honey, could you go to the Porsche and get a fresh can of balls?" I mean, any of the rest of us would say, "Would you go to the car? Could you get a fresh can of balls from the car?" But would you go to the Porsche?
But did the husband have the balls to say no? Get him yourself? Oh, she had him already. Oh, okay. Yeah.
He wasn't that great a player because he had knee problems, right? But but he had, that having the Porsche made up for the knee problems.
Well, see, look, this is the thing about labels and images and psychological value of that. Yeah. So the psychological value is saying, hey, I don't need affirmative action. That's for the weaklings.
No. As the people, are you kidding? It's
Not
like,
for
what
me.
accent? What accent? I have no accent.
I have no accent. That's for the weaklings. The weaklings, they're like that.
uh,
I do not need the permanent
that
action.
got the most laughs, man. That got like eternal laughs at my parents' 50th anniversary. Yeah, because I was talking about my parents' greatest achievements, and I saved that one for last. And of course, my mother's greatest achievement is that she has so mastered the language that she no longer has an accent. And then the whole place broke down. I mean, they just broke down. And my
Sure.
mother had this stare at me like, well, you should have been an abortion. You
Oh,
know,
hey,
she was
look,
like, she,
RJ or J EJ uh,
David.
David, he talks about skin whitening, right?
Oh, yeah.
I used to get skin whitening talks from my mom. I mean,
Right,
she would
right.
say, "Wear long
Lighten
sleeve
up.
shirts."
Lighten
Well,
up, dude. Oh
I
yeah, one time I went to we went to a Stanford jazz concert. In fact, it was the first outdoor biggie Stanford Jazz Conference. Fantastic conference. The problem was it was like 105 degrees inside the the amphitheater area, which was all lawn, you know.
yeah,
And so we were cooking out there. I had borrowed an ice cooler, you know, and a jug from my parents, right, the camping stuff.
yeah.
And so when we went back, my mother sees me and she said, "Why did you make yourself so dark?" Because she could see the change
Hey,
that
I
occurred
didn't
from
do it.
morning
God did it.
to
Nature did
afternoon.
it. The sun. The sun. Hey, hey, Dan. I want to get to a couple other things before we. I mean, I enjoy the conversation. We've talked about affirmative action,
Yep,
which is important. I
yep.
think we should talk about this other issue. I just some general election crosstabs I found here, and this is the. Here's the thing: politics is part of our. Look at this. Have you discussed
Oh,
politics
you're
with
looking at the
family?
questions, yeah.
Politics with family and friends. No, Filipinos only 64%. 35% said no.
I don't know.
2%.
That's not bad.
That's not bad.
That's
But
not
look,
bad.
compared to Asian Indians, 81%.
Absolutely.
Japanese, even the Koreans are like more than us in some ways, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
that's exactly the problem. That lines up perfectly with my experience in the classroom.
yeah, wow.
You know, I ask students, okay, yeah, that's a great position. It's well informed, factually correct. How'd you get there? And they say, oh, the media, the internet, and it stimulated the question. The issues are stimulated over the kitchen table, over dinner, stuff
Yeah.
like that. And you know who had the highest level of family interaction?
Woohoo.
Jewish Americans.
Oh yeah, that doesn't surprise me. They're engaged, right? And to
Yeah,
the degree
yeah.
that we're engaged, it will increase in our households. It'll increase in our households as the issues become relevant, in
Well,
terms of
now
work.
keep in mind, I'm teaching Asian American coursework. So it's in the Asian American department, but we're dealing with political issues because I teach a government course, a course on constitution
Oh, so
and court systems and politics.
you get white
And
people
so
in your
I
course, huh?
get I get non-Asian students.
Yeah.
And among them, I get a lot of white students, a few black students, and they have perspectives that add to the ingredients, right, of having a really good class discussion
Yeah.
because the Asians get exposed to other stuff, to other perspectives.
Right.
You know?
And they say, "Hey, I better speak out. I better speak up now." Hey, look at this. Here, let's go to this other question. Contributed money
Oh yeah, that's a good
to a
one.
candidate, political party, or some other campaign organization. Because a lot of people, look, we're really on the low side. We're all on the low side. Look at the Asian Indians. They give
Yeah,
money.
really, yeah,
Filipinos, no. And
yeah.
one of the
Asian
things,
Indians and Japanese Americans.
now I have a built-in excuse because as a journalist, it's not because I'm poor or I don't have any money, but as a journalist, I try to be objective.
Yeah.
So I don't give money. And I'll cop to this. I gave money once to a former journalist I worked with who ran and lost. And I gave him something, really small, like, $25. But as a token, I mean, because it was he was only asking, he was only asking for small contributions. So I think I gave him $25, maybe 50 by the end of the campaign. He did lose, but that's the only time I've ever given to a campaign. And as another caveat, I didn't write about it. So I was not in conflict. But there are some journalists who don't give money. They don't vote. They don't even vote. But here, our Filipino numbers are low. What's going to get this up higher, Dan? Dan.
And that is a lot of parish priests who have parishes that are hyperpopulated by Filipinos say that our donation pattern is on the low side. We give money, but we give low bucks.
Yeah.
And they asked me for a position. And I said, yeah, that's because one of the priorities is sending money back to the Philippines.
Yeah.
And right. So they don't contribute to NGOs, because NGOs asked me the same question as Roman Catholic priests in the Bay Area. Was, you got a lot of people, they show up, they're the most active elements in the parish, but they're low on the donor side.
Yeah.
And I said, that's because they send money back to the Philippines to support family.
That's the priority. And now the priority has got to be different. And I notice there's a lot of Filipino candidates, Filipino American candidates on the local level. That's going to change. Here's another question. Have you posted about politics on social media like Facebook or Twitter? And we're kind of average. We're getting there, but not as big. Let's move on. How about this? Have you attended
I'm on there every day.
Have you attended a protest, march, demonstration, or rally? No, we're not. No,
that's not bad. That's not bad, and I think that's going to be more youth oriented.
Yeah, it's higher. It's higher for.
It's higher than the other guys.
Yeah,
but see, some of that is also immigrant oriented because
DACA,
issues like nurses, right, and the professionals. They're also remember when Fraser had that 2 times they insulted Filipinos, right?
Yeah.
The Fraser's dad scolded the younger brother because he was spending so much money on his alienated, separated wife's light cosmetic surgery, and he said, $15,000 for $5,000, you can go to the Philippines, get a whole new wife. Okay, so that got a lot of
I forgot
that attention.
There's a lot of that in the past. I don't think that was generated by a Filipino. Just knowing how comedy writing staffs are popular.
What the nasty joke or what?
Well, I just know that you don't have a lot of Filipinos in the writers' room at major network television shows. Maybe now, but back then during Fraser. All right, let's move on. Donated to a religious organization.
Okay, now it's going to be higher.
Yeah, different.
Oh yeah, see, we're right up there with the Asian Indian.
Yeah, and the Koreans are high because they donate to their churches, and that's maybe if you get there's a reason why the Falwells, before they got kind of kinky, got so powerful. They merged religion and politics, the evangelical right. Maybe this is the way that Filipinos get some political power. What do you think?
Well, yeah, but the religious groups are Catholic, Protestant, and Iglesia de Cristo.
Right.
And Iglesia is really conservative.
Right. Well, that's all of them are conservative, really.
Yes, all three.
Unless you're talking about progressive wings of the Catholic Church, which
there are some very progressive.
They don't.
Al Tizon.
Yeah.
Yeah, the brother of the author of the story about Atlantic. Yeah.
Al Tizon compared to. See, here's that enthusiastic question. Look how enthusiastic we are. 61%. More enthusiastic. Right up there.
I think that's excellent.
Yeah, that's really the key takeaway about this about
the effect that this election is having on our community.
Yeah. And look, Republicans strong. Look how strong a Republican, Filipinos are. 51% compared to, that's like the standard bearer for Republicans, Republican Filipinos. My hat.
That's not bad. I mean, look at the Vietnamese though.
Yeah. Oh, Sorry about that. I didn't see them. 81%.
That's
81.
huge. I mean,
That,
it's freaking
that,
crazy.
that is huge. The Vietnamese. And it has to be because of Nixon and loyalty, the Vietnam War. You know,
Well,
I
yeah,
think,
but that generation is almost dead. I mean,
well, that's why you see that's why you might see a change. You might see some conflict in some other questions because the generational divide will be apparent. How about this?
on the campus, it seems that they lean more center left.
Yeah,
But I've had several Vietnamese students that are very hard right.
yeah, yeah. I don't. I think that's the 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 hold of the family, the hold of the traditional family. Let's move on to this one. Would you call yourself a strong Democrat? After a strong Republican, you see Filipinos are stronger Republicans. The strong Democrats, not that strong. We're
Yeah, it'd be interesting to break that down into a set of questions related to values
yeah,
and religion.
yeah. But it's interesting that our community is kind of split. We're like stronger Republicans than we are stronger Democrats. If people say, they go with a generalization, oh, Filipinos are strong, Democrats. That would be one stereotype because you'd say, oh, well, because Filipinos are union people, of course, right? Well, not necessarily. And
Yeah, that's true.
that's what this would show. All right, let's go to this question. Do you think of yourself as close to the Republican or the Democratic Party? Look at this. Close to the Republicans,
Oh
43
yeah,
Filipino.
I
Close to
think
the
that's about to change.
Well, I don't know. This was once again taken from July this year to September by the AAPI data folks. I
No,
think it's
I'm
I think
thinking
it's
more in terms of intermediate and long-term change. I think the younger Filipinos that are just coming into voting age now, I think they're going to displace the older Filipinos that have a tendency to vote conservative and identify with Republican. I think it's a money thing. I think
yeah,
it. I think they believe the economic stuff. Also, there are a lot of Filipinos who are into private service rendering, like insurance agents, real estate,
entrepreneurs.
agents
Yeah,
and brokers, and so you got to look at where their income is coming from.
yeah.
And you mentioned unions earlier, but
Unions aren't that strong.
yeah,
But look at the closer to the Republican Party question.
really
Look how
strong. Yeah,
close Filipino stronger
really
than the
strong.
Vietnamese. Stronger than the Vietnamese. I would just say, people might say, oh, because of the numbers, it may not be that, great a sample, but it's coming from AAPI data. You want to trust them because they're at least looking at these people and talking in language to these groups. I think it's kind of interesting, that there's a stronger
Yeah,
tie to the Republican Party.
yeah.
How about
It's
now look
interesting,
at this.
especially in light of the fact that they're not that crazy about Trump. I mean, there's a smaller group of people
Yeah. Not
that
that
are
crazy
in
about
favor.
Trump or Biden, really. How about this? Based
Right,
on where
right.
the
That's
two
true.
part
That's true.
yeah, based on where the two parties stand on the issues, do you think your views are closer to the Republican or Democratic Party? Look at where the Filipinos are. Closer to the Democrats, 48. Close to the Republican. Oh, nope. That was a
Wow,
bad
that's really
call.
interesting.
Yeah. I mean
What
this
that is really abrupt.
what?
That on the issues
Yeah.
it's so low.
Yeah.
And
It's just
if that's accurate, that's happy news.
yeah.
That's happy news because that stands in real contrast to the last data that we looked at, which is people feeling closer to the Republican Party. That's
Right.
really
See, this
that's almost a 180.
this is the thing about polling, right? You just it's by phone. People can lie. You say snapshot in time, but we talk about this because the way polling is done, we don't show up. We're not around, and I think that's why it's important to at least say, hey, look at this. Look at these historical snapshots of the community, of the Filipino community politically. It's just interesting. We're not supporting one candidate or the other, but just looking at the data, thinking about the election. If the election were held today, you'd be inclined to vote for 53 Biden, 31 Trump. We talked about that earlier. And then here's
I would, that's right on the money. I always say about 1 out of 3 Filipinos is pro-Trump.
Yeah.
So that's right there.
1 out of 3.
I mean, last time around, 2016, this same group did a post-election survey, and they came up with 27%, right, of Filipinos voted for Trump.
Right. Let's on the economy. We talked about jobs in the economy. Very important to extremely important. And then how about this? This came up. This will segue into these are 2 sets of issues. We have. Let's go immigration first. Not that 2% said not that important, but look, very important 42. We're right up there with the Asian Indians. Extremely important 31. Immigration. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, that's predictable. I mean, we have a constant stream, right, of immigration. It's been slowed because of Trump era policies. Even under Obama, it slowed a little bit because of the what is it, H1 and H2?
Yeah,
those categories.
Oh yeah. The
H1B, all that.
The special worker categories. So
yeah,
and then I want to go to this issue, healthcare. I mean, immigration will always be our issue, and
as long as we have a constant stream, and as long as the Philippines has a huge majority of people in poverty.
Right. So here is a this is on healthcare. Now we'd like to ask you about some issues that might be important. Healthcare, and look at the very important and the extremely important. We're right up there. Not as
that's good.
I mean, this shows that there's a reason why the Republicans on Amy Coney Barrett's, the questioning on the first day of questioning focused on healthcare because, healthcare being stripped during a time of the pandemic, see who's getting hurt, see who's on the front lines. This is important.
Well, what you said was just now was Republicans. You said what Republicans did, and I think you meant to say what Democrats did, but.
I'm just saying that what the Democrats did when they went after Amy Coney Barrett is that they questioned her on healthcare.
And the Republicans did everything they could to avoid it.
You're right. They didn't want to say, they didn't, and they
didn't. All they did was talk about how that wouldn't necessarily go after voting rights, that she wouldn't necessarily go after abortion, etc.
Right.
But showing her past.
The question on healthcare was whether or not the case that comes up before the Supreme Court November 10th that she might presumably be a part of, it has to do with that idea of severability and whether you can pluck something out of the law and if it's still good. I don't know. She kept recusing herself and didn't say. But
she was using severability. She was you're right on the money. She was using severability, or the concept of severability, to avoid answering the question on whether or not she should recuse.
Right. Oh, that's right. And then she was just saying,
and I got a lot of people on the Republican side of the fence who said that she should recuse. And I responded by saying, well, she's signaling that she's not going to if the issue comes up, if she's appointed and approved.
I just want to point out that by showing this slide here on where the Filipinos are in healthcare, it's pretty important. I mean, not extremely.
It's strong. Important. It's strong and it's logical because we have so many professionals that are in healthcare.
Yeah. So, Dan, as we wind down, I have a couple more things to ask you. I want to ask you about some of the stories that we've seen that come up. We've talked about this poll because, like I said, the absence of Asian Americans and Filipino Americans from polls makes me want to
Yeah.
talk about every poll where we're kind of the focus. So I wanted to go through these with you and talk to you about how we stand historically. What do you think? You know, this poll was taken in September. We're now in the middle of October. Do you think anything has changed?
Uh,
Do you think the numbers have gone up or down or anything is, or do you think
I
it's pretty
think
much?
you're going to see, so far, there's been a slight decrease
Mhm,
in some, in the national poll.
mhm.
For Biden, there's been a slight decrease. I think it was up by 11 last week. He's up by 9 now.
Yeah.
But that doesn't matter as much as what's happening at the state level, particularly in the swing states. And he has suffered a loss in the single digits, very low single digits, like 1 or 2 points in a couple of swing states. But other than that, he's held steady.
Yeah.
The problem is that the lead isn't so great that it cannot be overcome in a last minute surge, of Republican voters. So the swing state issue is still at play.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that's happened, though, is that some of the states that used to be reliably conservative, now a couple of them are really crazy for Biden. I mean, if it's you wonder about the accuracy of the poll because it's so crazy for Biden. And I think what happens there is it's about campaign strategy. It's not about voters. The only thing that they can do to try and increase their voters is more registrations, which they have succeeded in doing in several states, more Republican registrations than Democrats. But the measure that the poll takers used was in the last 6 months. And so the Democrats are arguing that we've had people swinging over and registering as Democrats for the last 2 years, or even 3 years, which explains why 2018 happened with the lower house.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's changed that much. And even though it looked good for Biden, I just really don't like relying on the polls to develop an attitude on the strength of the likelihood, right, that he's going to get elected.
I just want to, like I said, I talk about these Asian American polls just because we have some real data and it's worth talking about. Not necessarily.
How big is the N?
There's about 138 Filipinos in the poll, and in the national poll, and I think that even the numbers in the California numbers, the plus or minus on the national poll, by AAPI data is something like 2 to 3% margin for error.
Okay.
It's a greater margin for error in the California segments. Might be higher, might be as much as 8 or 9 or 10. But it's something that gives us a sense of where we are.
Yeah.
And we're not zero. That's the thing. The alternative is we're zero and we're not there. We're not included and no one talks about us. But we're going to talk about us all day. No, we're not going to talk all day if we have to. But let me ask you this. Something happened last week. We're talking about votes and counts and that kind of thing. The Supreme Court, and this happened during the Coney Barrett hearings to indicate how important the Supreme Court is. The Supreme Court said the extension on the census would not go to December, would end in October 15th. What's that mean for our count? Are we going to be undercounted seriously, do you think?
I think we're still suffering from an undercount. But my understanding is that it's a general undercount. So the question is, where is that undercount occurring? Is the undercount occurring in places where Filipinos actually have a substantial presence, or is the undercount occurring where, we have some presence, but it's not a large block? It's not a tight population block within a close geographic setting.
Yeah.
So if the undercount is bad in Daly City, that's bad.
Yeah.
That's bad. If the undercount is bad in San Francisco, it's bad, but it's not like an undercount in Daly City or an undercount in Vallejo or an undercount in Union City or Hayward, places like that.
You know what I was.
We have a small number. I mean, it's going to be. I'm interested in the census because I want to see if we grew, stayed steady, or I've lost population.
Yeah.
And the likelihood is, with the costs of homes and rent, that we lost, people. Unless a lot of the people who are here, have really good incomes and are in the techie world, right? And because those are the people who are getting the most money, right? They're getting six-figure incomes, individual incomes, right out of the box.
Right.
So if there are young couples, married or not, but they're living together and they're holding each other out as husband and spouse, and especially if they have children, they may be the new population for Filipinos. But I can't see how people who are making as individuals under $100,000, I can't see how they can live in the city.
Well, one of the things that I'm concerned about is that usually if you've answered the census within the last 10 years or 20 years, if you're older, they have a record. People haven't moved that much, but there are people who are continuing to be in transit or are transitory. They might have fallen into substandard kind of what they define as substandard kind of housing, meaning that, okay, you're a kid out of college, you're on your own. Now you're back at home with your mom, or maybe you're in your 30s and you're on, you were lived away from home. Now you're coming back because of, reversals in the economy, and forget about just people who are born here and, are going back to live with their parents. There are immigrants who have been kicked out of a rental situation, have moved in with friends and family, have a support system. If you've got friends and family, then maybe you could be counted. But if not, you go into that uncounted path of people who
there you go
can't be found. And
that's a very good point.
That's where you have to worry about an undercount. The other thing is, did people who are Filipino nationals? You're in America. You may not think that you count, but you count, even if you have a brown passport. And a lot of those people may not feel like, it's really a count of people, not a count of citizens. And that was not clear, especially when they asked the citizenship question, or when they wanted to, and the court stopped that. That whole confusion upsets me as far as the census goes. So that happened, just this week. They tried to stop it. I think they're going to continue hearing some. They can continue at the court level, I believe, to see if they can expand that deadline. They keep going back and forth, but the latest one from the Supreme Court was the December. No, they ended it October 15th. I had a thing on the pop-up about a month ago saying, hey, go to the census website and get counted. It's important. And I hope people did, because it'll make a difference, from everything.
It does make a difference. And it makes a difference that could last 10 years.
10 or longer. You get a gerrymandered district that's carved up, no representation, or maybe you get stuck with someone who's not going to leave, and you got to wait.
I think the good news on gerrymandering is even people who are traditional Republican voters don't like gerrymandering. So they're starting to react to the unfairness of gerrymandering. Once again, just like appointment of judges, Democrats have been asleep at the wheel for about 30 years.
Yeah.
And so Republicans have gotten an advantage. The problem is that you can't assume that just because somebody was recommended by the Federalist Society that they're going to make all decisions based on a predictable set of conservative criteria.
Right.
Because conservative judges, conservative lawyers want to follow the law. I mean, so the question is, are they willing to do something that actually goes beyond the law or is against the law as the facts apply, or against the facts as the law apply? And I think a lot of those judges are not going to make simply politically biased decisions. So, you know, they got a lot of people on the courts, particularly the courts of appeal. And then there's the question of whether or not they're sitting as individuals or a small bank or en banc, you know, all together.
Yeah.
And so because even though they've put a lot of people on the circuit courts of appeal, if the liberal elements say that's not a fair decision, we're going to go en banc, right? It raises the chances that you're going to get a fairer decision that's less biased. Doesn't mean it's going to change the decision. It just means that it's, you know, the outcome is going to be more fairly achieved.
Well, I just, you know, it's the census is important.
Hell yes.
We people.
There's three things, right, that are really important. The voting is obviously really important. The census doesn't come around as often, but it is just as important. Right. And then the next thing is doing jury duty. You know, it's really important.
Yeah, a lot of
people.
You know
how many questions I get? I get more questions on how can I get away with not going to jury duty than I ever get about what can I expect on going to jury duty.
This is about being a public Asian, a citizen, a person who you have to do this public service. And
a full participant.
And once you get in, you see what goes on in the courts, and you know that ought to light
that can affect your political point of view too. Oh, yeah. You know, participating in a trial process can also affect how you begin to see American institutions, whether or not they're working in the rather ideal fashion that they're described as working, or if there's some problems with them. You know, my biggest problem personally and from experience was making arguments in front of immigration judges. You know, that's potentially a very highly corrupt system, because the immigration judges are INS judges.
Right.
ICE judges. They're ICE judges.
Yeah,
they're separate. Working for that institution.
Right.
You know.
Well, it's the same thing.
They're not. Yeah, they're not in the general family, right, of the judicial system. They're in a very specific framework.
Just like if people go to arbitrators, or, you know, they go to, like, who usually are retired judges, and it's not that these guys can't be trusted, but you get hired by a company, and
that's right.
It's the gravy train for the arbiters to get hired by these companies to decide these cases, and you want the companies that hire you want favorable judgments, and this is why you got to go to trial. This is why you got to support the trial lawyers, and you got to support the jury system, because that's where you're going to get your fair break. But so many people are they're forced to choose arbitration by contract or by, you know. Yeah. So anyway, that whole thing is part of our democracy, and we see erosion all around.
Yeah, it's affected by privatization. The schools are affected by privatization. The prisons are affected by privatization. By schools, I mean K through, you know, because there's contract schools, right? Private schools that are contracted by the school district. Contract prisons. You know, we got prisons that are contracted for construction, maintenance, and personnel.
So you're saying
that build jails.
Yeah.
And they build them, they maintain them, and they hire the personnel, and they're supposed to be doing a public activity, which is maintaining prisons for people that we've convicted of crimes. Now, do you think there may be like a room for corruption there?
Hey, wait a minute. Let me get this straight. So the inmates of these prisons built by these companies are hired by these companies to build more prisons.
No. The
okay.
companies have the contracts to build the prisons, right? Then they maintain the prisons with both non-prison guard, right, personnel, as well as the prison guard personnel. So they hire both sets of those employees, right? And so there, it's already been proven that there's corrupt. Remember Arpaio? In Arizona?
Yeah.
Arpaio, Sheriff Arpaio. He was finally discredited, right? This was the guy who was going to go to Asia and find proof that Obama was not born in America, right? And he finally got thrown out of office, and he was prosecuted and found guilty. And guess who pardoned him?
Oh, it was Trump.
That guy's family was invested in private prisons.
Yeah.
Okay, and it was also proven that a couple of judges were on the tape, that they had family that had investments.
This is the thing. We shine a light on these things. We shine light on all these things. Okay, look, Dan, you have been a saint to and a great font of knowledge to comment on all these things. But as we wind down, because we've been on, including the pre-show, and then we had the show, and then we have to have the post-show where we talked about what we talked about. No, we're not gonna have a post show. We're not gonna.
No.
If you've hung out with us this long, I appreciate it. Tell your friends that they can come back and see the recording and they can use the fast forward. But I want to talk in closing. I want to talk about 1587, our origin story. Tomorrow,
sure,
on our Sunday show, I will reenact the origin story. I'm sure you'll come back for that. It'll be a shorter show on Sunday because Sunday's a special day. I'll be on it tomorrow. We'll be on at 1 o'clock tomorrow because I've got something else that I've previously booked, a journalism roundtable. But anyway, today we're going to give you the origin story, 1587, Pedro de Unamuno. And this is one of the things about FANHS. Fred Cordova was not an academic. He was a librarian. And Eloise Bora was a librarian, and she did research. I mean, they have access to research, and the research is pretty good. She was published in the UCLA's Amerasia Journal, and she got a hold of Pedro de Unamuno's logs. And she counted all the Filipinos in the logs. And from that, the publication of her piece established that Filipinos stepped foot on what is now California, October 18th, 1587. That's the origin story. What do you think, Dan? There's been so many different origin stories, in the history of FANHS, but this is the one that FANHS likes. What is your opinion of the origin story that Pedro de Unamuno, a Spanish explorer sailing for Spain, comes?
I'm ashamed to say this story, and you'll understand why in a second. It was sometime around 1972. I hadn't yet applied for law school. That's how I tell time, before law school, after law school. And I got a small packet. Well, actually, it was probably about 20 or 30 pages and of Xerox material. And it had a Post-it on it. And this is when Post-its were brand new. I mean, I was celebrating the fact that, ooh, look.
Post-it.
I got a Post-it. And so, excuse me. It was from, and Malcolm Collier, one of my colleagues in Asian American Studies, can testify to this. His training is in visual anthropology and anthropology generally. Leo Kimnitzer is a professor of anthropology, and it was his note on the sheaf of papers. And it asked a simple question. is this the first known contact of Filipinos with the New World? And it was Pedro Unamuno's log in Spanish. And I simply answered, yeah. That's it. So we knew about it in 72. The next time I heard about it was from Wolf. I can't remember his full name, but the guy had a little bit of academic degree around history, and he was a curator for one of the mission sites. I think it might have been Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
And he also interpreted, he looked at the ship's log. And here's the problem. Everybody went out and put out a plaque at Morro Bay.
Right.
The problem is, if you read the ship's log, there's no mention of the biggest single factor that is absolutely visible for miles in either north or south at Morro Bay. And it ain't the water, and it ain't the hills. It's this huge freaking rock, known as Morro Rock. That is nowhere described in Unamuno's log.
Look, Dan, 1587, couldn't it be that something happened, post 1587 to create that big rock? Or do you think, let's see, do we have the Ice Age? Do we have the, I'm not trying to be an apologist. I'm just saying that, could it be that they left it out because, I don't know, could they have missed it?
They describe a whole lot of other stuff, in pretty good detail.
The absence of the rock.
So here's another story. There are people who have gone and sailed.
Oh, yes.
And used the latitude, longitude mentioned in the log. And what they found was that it didn't line up with Morro Bay.
And it lined up more with Half Moon Bay, right?
Yeah, a little bit more north.
Further north.
Yeah, further north. And so, that's kind of strong. Now, it's been 400 years, right? So, climbing up to 450. So, could the alignment,
433 to be exact, 433.
Okay, could the alignment of stars, right, be such that it could throw them off a little bit? But it still would have thrown them off more to the north than to the south.
Yeah.
So there it is. That's the problem. That's the problem. Now, so we don't have a problem that they landed in California somewhere. We just have the problem as there's no mention of Morro Rock.
So, all right, Eloisa Gomez Bora, this librarian, she and one-time trustee of FANHS, she published this in 1996 in UCLA's Amerasia Journal. She described this, and what the things that you've just said, how does it impact her original scholarship? Does it say maybe she's not 100% right? What do you think it does to her?
I think it contests the placement at that location. Everything else can be fine. But the problem is that when you come up with something that doesn't match up and you mention it, and everybody else wants to be excited about Morro Bay because it's big rock, that's a big deal, right? We have a geological landscape factor that's associated not only with the presence, but the arrival of Filipinos, the first known arrival of Filipinos, right? Yeah. And so people want to claim that. It's like people claiming the 45 automatic. They claim that, the Colt 45 was invented. It was invented to kill Filipinos. It was not invented to kill Filipinos.
Oh, Dan, another myth buster, huh?
We either tell the truth. Look, when you make mistakes like that and you hold on to them as part of your mythology of history, you open yourself up to having everything else that you believe discredited.
All
That's
right.
the
No,
problem.
what is the truth with the Colt 45? It was not given to the World War II
No,
unit to shoot down
okay.
Filipinos.
The Colt 45, first of all, the evidence that the Colt 45 was not invented to kill Filipinos specifically, right, is that the Colt 45 is called the A1 1911. The U.S. Army is very literal. When they start using a device, they date it, and 1911 is the device. Okay, now, was it used in the Philippines against Filipinos? The answer is yes. Was it the gun that was chosen and designed to kill Filipinos? No, okay? The fact of the matter was they were having a tough time putting down some of the Southern fighters, particularly the people that were referred to as Moros, right? And so the problem was that the new guns had light loads and a smaller bullet. Okay? And what they discovered was that the 45 slug, okay, we're talking about the bullet itself. We're not talking about the cartridge. We're not talking about the gun. The 45 slug was more effective. And so they wanted to go back to using the 45 slug, which fit in revolvers, like the famous Colt 45 long Colt revolvers, right? Cowboy days, okay? So that was the gun that was used. And so it's a 45 caliber, but it is not the ACP. It is not the automatic Colt pistol round. When you're talking about the 45 automatic, that's the 45 ACP. When you get that wrong, there's gun freaks out there, gun historians like crazy. And if you make stuff up like that and you everything else you say about the wars, about the role of the United States in killing innocent civilians, that all comes into doubt.
All right, so it wasn't the Colt 45, but there was a gun, a 45 caliber gun.
Yeah, but it wasn't invented to kill Filipinos, okay? Yeah. Neither of those guns was invented to kill Filipinos.
It was just invented to kill anyone.
Well, but why? See, here's the important consideration. It's not just that. It was invented to kill anybody, but here's the important consideration. Filipinos want to grab onto that because the 45 ACP, the Colt automatic, is such, from a wartime and guncraft perspective, is a very romantic weapon.
Yeah.
It's a very romantic weapon.
I'm not trying to hang on to the Colt 45 myth. I'm just saying, it would be nice that we were so invincible. They had to have a special gun to get us. But look, I'm with you. I don't need the romance of that. All right, so now we get going back to.
We got to cut that stuff out.
All right,
too much romance, not enough fact.
So going back to Morro
that I
Bay.
have with some of the psychology. Pardon me?
Yeah. Or go ahead.
That again?
Finish your thought.
Well, one of the arguments that I have with the psychologists is, they laugh at me when I say, this is just tell the truth, because they know that you can't tell the whole truth. Okay.
Why not?
So I should come out with a blog that says truth in smaller doses. Because you got to take it easy on folks when you contradict entirely, right? I mean, remember some of the mythology that we saw in the 80s? Remember that a Filipino invented the fluorescent bulb? You ever heard about that?
I don't remember. I've heard that the Filipino invented Viagra. Is that? I think that's truthful, but I don't know. I've never used it, but I have heard it or named Viagra. No, so
there were a couple of, I think it was the Pastor brothers worked for Hughes Aircraft down in Southern California, and they can be credited with developing the first working laser, projectable laser. And that I found is pretty true. There was another one that the lunar landing craft, the lunar rover, was invented by a Filipino. There was a Filipino who was on that team. But it doesn't mean that a Filipino invented it. See, and so we have this tendency to want to find heroes that we can propose.
All right,
Look
Dan,
at Carlos Bulosan.
How about this?
Look at Carlos Bulosan, right?
This is real, though. The
they
Duncan
say,
yo-yo.
Okay, biography, right? This is biographical. There were about 3 people, back in the early 70s that said it's not biographical, man.
I mean,
and I was one of them.
What you mean? America's in the Heart.
America's in the Heart. And they said, people were claiming that it was biographical, man. And Oscar Peñaranda, the writer, and teacher of literature and history, right, was one of the people who said, nah, it's not autobiographical. It's not biographical.
It's fiction. Fiction.
And believe it or not, NVM Gonzales. So, you know, NVM. Now people can say, well, there's that Gonzales bias. We're not related.
No, look,
so NVM.
All right, look, I have simple little myths like the Duncan yo-yo. Robert Flores, he was Filipino. He invented the Duncan yo-yo, right?
Okay.
That's true.
You know, I think it's true to the extent that design of yo-yo, that particular kind of design of yo-yo, right, that had that allowed you to have a slip spindle, right, which is the secret, right? Is if it slips and it slips really fast, you can do all kinds of tricks with it, right? And so yes, I would say yes. But other people are saying, well, they're looking at the yo-yo and looking at it as an instrument, right? And they say, well, look at this. There's a Greek carving that goes back to 3000, BC.
Wow. They're gonna go after us with the Greeks. Are they gonna go after us with the Greeks?
And it has this device, that's got a string and it's two balanced pieces.
Man,
so those guys got.
That was the Greek yo-yo. Come on, Dan. Not the Filipino yo-yo. All right, look. Dan,
the laugher is no, it was a weapon because the Filipinos would be up in the trees, and when people would come underneath them, they'd bonk them on the head with a yo-yo, and then the weapon would return, so they could bonk them again. You know what I'm saying? What the hell?
Dan,
it would make more sense if they knocked them out.
So you're saying
by flicking it out in front, but bonking them on the top of the head. Yeah, you know how much that yo-yo would have to weigh, and if it did work to come back.
Hey, it's the David versus Goliath thing. So you're saying even the yo-yo as weapon. Okay, all right. Look, let's go back to Morro Bay. Let's not do
that. Yeah, Morro Bay. So Morro Bay.
Let's just go back to the
story. We landed here. It's clear that at least 20, what the name of the term?
Indios.
It was Luzones Indios.
Luzones,
Not natives of Luzon. Landed and they gathered, wood, provisions, food,
right,
and all that. Now, there's some people who theorize that some of them may have stayed. They may have jumped ship and intermarried among the Chumash.
The Chumash, who are the Central Coast. I mean, I'm on Chumash land now. I mean,
they come up that far?
Sorry, I'm on Miwok.
Yeah, that's right. That's more like
Miwok, Yokut.
Yeah, exactly.
Chumash is just south of us. Sorry about that. I don't mean to offend our
It's all right. It's all right.
Native listeners. Not, I'm just learning the native map now, but Yokut and Miwok.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So they may have intermarried, and because they arrived on the 18th, October 18th. They climbed 2 hills, saw no settlements, and took possession of the land for the King of Spain.
Right.
So that's how it was the first Spanish.
Yeah.
Right.
And then the other thing is that line about they saw no settlements. There were settlements around Morro Rock.
Yeah, but just not. They were Indian, probably, right? There were no European. No.
That's right.
No other Filipino. On the second day, October 19th, 8 Filipino scouts led a priest, of course, and 12 soldiers for further exploration. They saw what they could see. And then on the third day, and this is a pivotal day, on the 20th, they encountered violence.
Yep.
The ship's barber and some Filipinos were offered to, they were making a food and clothing offering, and which isn't clear. I guess they needed haircuts, I guess. But there was a skirmish, and the Indians tried to kidnap the barber, which kind of makes sense, but it was probably a Spanish barber, like, Barbara Seville kind of barber, and not like a Filipino barber, which there was a ton in the 1920s. But look, there was this violent exchange. One soldier was killed, as noted in the log, and one unnamed Filipino killed by javelin. So, Filipino blood was spilled, 1587. That's something.
Yeah, it's real. And I said that I was embarrassed to admit that I'd seen that material because I could have done something with it. But I was more interested in. I didn't see myself as a historian. I saw myself as a political historian trying to get into law school. That's what I was trying to do.
Dan, you could have done something with it, and then some young whippersnapper in 2020 would say, "Yeah, but was it Morro Bay? Did they see the rock?"
Yeah. But see, that's what we didn't. One of the reasons that I just let it go was that I thought other people were going to pick it up and run with it, and because I thought it was pretty important, but that didn't happen. The closest we got was Marina Espina doing her thing about Louisiana, right, or right. Mississippi rather,
and the galleon trade. And
now they put a plaque up at San Malo too. So
yeah,
we got all these little places that, my students, why is this important? I ask my students, why is this important? Okay. I'm starting to get a low battery thing. We got to wind up because I'm on my laptop and I'm getting a low battery.
Oh, sorry about that. All right. So why is this important, Dan? We've gone on. I mean, it seems like Morro Bay is maybe not the place, but Pedro de Unamuno's logs say this is the place, or not this place, but it happened.
Yeah. What's important is that we were here. Okay, the one that we were here. Two, it doesn't necessarily establish that we belong. That's the hard part. Just because we landed doesn't mean we can claim. Okay. However, there is a possibility that some stayed behind. Okay, did not return to the ship and married among the locals. The problem is they didn't leave a written history. So we can't prove that, okay? And you could try to prove DNA, but the problem is since then, there's been, the first time that Filipinos who arrived in the 20th century started intermarrying with people down there in the Central Coast was in the 20s, the teens in the 20s, the late teens in the 20s. There are actually Filipino organizations that are on record as having been established in that area. I think maybe north of that area, Paso Robles.
Yeah.
Like that.
So it's important, but the thing that gets me is that, like you said, do we have a right to a claim? Do we have? That's right. Do we have the power? We didn't have the power. Right. But we were there first.
Start a known democratic community? Did we start a known Filipino community, right?
Did we start a pool hall?
Well, you already mentioned barbershop.
Barbershop. I mean, the thing is, we didn't, but we do go into this area of myth, and I think we've lost a good professor. His battery, but we go into this area of myth where I talked about this last week. Columbus did not discover America. He thought he was going to China. He thought he was in Japan when he hit the Bahamas, and later on when he was in Cuba, he thought he was in China. He was out there looking for Asia, and he found, because he didn't realize this thing would be in the way called the Americas. He stumbled into the gateway to the New World. And later on, he was given credit for being the discoverer of America. See, he had the power, or someone had the power to write that history. So this is where we are with Filipino American History Month. It's up to scholars to dig in and analyze. We had Dan was mentioning the longitude latitude thing. People have replicated the sail to try to figure out what they found. Maybe it wasn't Morro Bay, maybe it was closer to Half Moon Bay, but they were there. So we remember October 18th, the day when Pedro de Unamuno in his boat landed somewhere in California, maybe south of Half Moon Bay to Morro Bay. And the Filipinos who were working on the ship stepped foot on California, October 18th, 1587. And that's why we celebrate October as Filipino American History Month. Well, this is another, I love that Dan Gonzales. We just keep going on and on because he's so full of knowledge. There's so much to impart. If you've hung out with us, thank you for your indulgence. Thank you for staying in. Because I haven't said this thing. Oh, he wants to come back and say hi or goodbye. Because we haven't set this thing up quite right, I can't get to the comments in real time. But I welcome you to get to the comments in real time, or we'll get to the comments in real time. Dan, I'm just wrapping up saying how wonderful you are. I think I mentioned something, your name and the word love at the same time. That may have been a mistake. It may have been an overstatement. Showing emotion. But Dan, I want to thank you for hanging in there with us.
Yeah, I'm sorry about losing you for a moment there. My bat went out, and you're looking at me from my phone now.
Well, that's good. I love it. This is technology. People see the behind the scenes. I was just wrapping up, saying that, look, there's no disputing that Pedro de Unamuno and Filipinos were somewhere in October 18th, 1587. Whether it was Morro Bay or not, if you're down in Morro Bay, there's a big plaque there in Morro Bay. Right. And it's like
Filipinos are into plaques.
It's plaque. There's a plaque there. It's about 100 feet away from a public restroom. So you all the accommodations are there. And you get a view from there of the rock.
Yeah.
You can see the rock. And the
biggest thing around.
And the rock is one of those things in dispute. I have to admit, I visited that rock a couple of times.
Me too.
And I always because when you drive up and down the coast, it's a nice thing to visit, and it's a nice jumping off point. There are other things in Morro Bay.
There's SLO. SLO is down there, and I've had to, visit the place and make a couple of seminars or symposia. Yeah. Also, Hearst Castle. The Hearst Castle.
Hearst Castle, yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love, I used to go to Santa Barbara a lot, and that would be a nice little reminder that, I still have got more to drive.
Oh, yeah, man.
Yeah, it's far to Santa Barbara, but not that far to SLO. And of course, there's that place where you can drive on the beach. It's kind of a working class.
If you have the correct equipment, yes.
Yeah. So, but anyway, look, Dan, thank you for just being part of our, our pop-ups. Like I said, people, I know we tend to talk long. That's because you're so full of information. Between now and the election, I want to talk to you maybe after the election.
Okay, for sure.
Because there's going to be, are we going to have any more October surprises?
They're going to try. They're going to try, but most of them are fizzlers. I think that it's interesting, right? I got a confusing message this morning that the DOJ is trying to determine whether or not the president on his own individual accord can declassify material on the so-called Russia hoax, because he said he wanted to declassify everything. He actually did. But he did that by statement and tweet, and they don't know if that's sufficient, right, to declassify everything. Now, I found it interesting. What confused me is, why would the DOJ ask that question? Because that means that if it's not legitimate, that he shouldn't do it. Yeah. Why would the DOJ, which has been under the manipulation of Attorney General Barr, not want it to all be declassified? Okay, now there's only two reasons, right? Yeah. There's only two possible reasons. One, national security, which everybody uses as an excuse not to disclose stuff. Nixon did that, right? National security, you can't have the tapes, okay? And so that could be why they want to do it. Or the less legitimate reason is there's stuff in there that's really going to mess everybody over, including President Trump.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we don't know, you know?
Or yeah, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen between now and the election, and of course we talk about the election not to pick sides, but only to talk about it in an historical sense about how active Filipinos are now more than ever, how engaged Filipinos are now more than ever, and we should expect to see more of this going forward. You know,
I'm really hopeful. I'm very hopeful, particularly for the younger generations. You know, there's a lot of people who were witness to Parkland and who were motivated by Parkland against the massive distribution of weapons, guns throughout.
I mean, Parkland, you mean the high school in Florida?
Yeah, exactly.
And the gun violence. Yeah.
That's right.
Well, there's that. And there's also George Floyd and Black Lives Matter.
Right. No, absolutely true. But I'm using, you know, the school shooting, the high school shooting in Florida, because that's what motivated that age group really strongly. Now everything else carries through, so that once they got engaged, right, when other issues arise, they make choices as to whether or not they want to engage those issues as well. And you're absolutely right if you're implying that their engagement will follow through on social justice issues. I think you're right.
I'm just hoping that we see that where we are as Filipino Americans is part of an evolution, and we're just evolving before our eyes, generations. I mean, if we put the Filipinos here, who knows if they got off in 1587, jumped ship, and, you know, started mingling with the natives, and actually they dropped blood, but did they create families? We know that Filipinos first arrived 19th century. So how many different generations do we have? Do we have at least 5, 6, 7 generations?
Yeah.
You know, since, I mean, if we're 7 generations in America, look at how slowly we have evolved to where we have a dependable voice where we can say, hey, look, there we are, 5 million Filipino Americans.
Well, we had a conversation parallel to this one back in the 80s when you you made phone calls down to Mississippi and Louisiana to Cajun Filipinos. That was another good time. That was an excellent time.
See, now Dan's referring to the fact that I ran a Filipino American radio show because I didn't speak Tagalog, but I ran it in San Francisco, and I was trying to call up Filipino Americans who were descendants of the original Filipinos who jumped ship off those Manila galleons and started Filipino colonies. And I started down by Jean Lafitte, down south to New Orleans, and I because I knew I was going to be going there, and, you know, for some business thing, and I like a loon, you know, are you a Filipino, or, you know, are you a Filipino? I found one. I found a couple. They call themselves coon-ass Filipino.
I remember you weren't ready for that answer. I remember you were asking, well, so how do you refer to yourselves? What do you call yourselves? And he goes, coon-ass Filipinos. And I busted up. I fell out, man. That was really
I'm telling you, I was not expecting that, but there were Filipino Cajuns from that area, from that region, and it was kind of surprising. So, look, 1587, not far-fetched to think there were some Chumash Filipinos. Someone's going to have to do that scholarship. But now, you know, we have evolved. If we're 7 generations in America, 6, 7, 8 generations in, look at how we've evolved. And this gives me hope, because there are young Filipinos who are saying, hey, who are we? What are we? What's our history? and they're discovering it through conversations like this. So, Dan, I appreciate you coming on again. We'll talk
Well,
about the
thanks for
election.
having me. It's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure, Emil.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
once when we get over the COVID-19 thing, we will again break bread and
yeah.
have
Well,
enjoy some nice aperitifs.
yeah. Well, you have.
All of a sudden, there's like 11 mezcal joints in San Francisco.
Yeah.
I've been into mezcal since the '60s, right? But as a preference to tequila,
Yeah.
and it's still not easy to get tequila. I mean, I'm sorry,
Let's
mezcal
go.
locally at the local. You have to go to a place that specializes in booze, right? Like
And
Bevmo or something like
yeah,
that.
and
But
mezcal. You're referring to the wormy thing.
yeah, that's how I first got it. But the only one with the worm in it that I remember is Gusano Rojo, and that's exactly what it is, the red worm, and that's the cheaper end.
Yeah.
The
Hey,
higher
look.
end of mezcal is unbelievably good. It's very smoky.
Yeah.
It's very smoky, and
Oh, it's
so a lot.
like
Yeah,
scotch.
yeah, even smokier than scotch.
Mm. Well, look, if I have mezcal with you, I'm going to have to go vegan.
Yeah, well, that's okay.
No
That's
worm.
okay.
No worm.
No, no, they don't put the worm in the higher end mezcal.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
don't know
good.
why they
Good.
don't do that.
That's right. The rosado, the good, whatever
It
you
is
say.
supposed to increase your masculinity, however.
Oh well, no, that's not an issue for me. So Dan, look, really, thank you again. I'm going to call on you. I always call on you. You're always good to come help the museum. Once again, I'm Emil
I am
Guillermo.
also a donor. I'm not only a guest, I'm
Uh,
also a donor.
he's also a donor. Yes, no, and also a very important person in terms of the amount of scholarship, and a close associate of the late and lamented Professor Don Mabalin, who is
Yeah,
a daughter of Stockton, and
yeah.
we always think of Don, but really, Dan, it's been good. I just want to say to the people, you can find all. Dan and I have not had access to our chat, so if you had questions, put it in chat. We'll go to the questions afterwards and answer them. You can always leave a message, email me, or leave a message there on the Facebook page at FANHS Museum. You can Twitter me at Emil Amok, EMILAMOK. Follow me there. You can also see all our pop-ups on the Facebook Live page of the museum. We'll be back again tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll reenact what happened those 3 days in October when the Filipinos were here. I'll do that tomorrow. I'll post on the Facebook
Are
page.
you gonna do it straight up or what, man?
No, no. Well, the barber they killed. They wanted the barber. No, we'll do something tomorrow. And then let's see. So check us out tomorrow. I'll put up on the Facebook page what time we'll do it because I have to do this thing, some journalism roundtable. But thank you very much again for joining us here on the pop-ups. The museum is still closed this weekend. We want to be open, but we've got to take care of our peeps, our volunteers. Our volunteers are all mostly in high risk groups, and we got to take care of them before.
You're senior. A lot of them are seniors. Yeah.
Yeah, and we got to take care of them before we take care of the public. And once we open, our capacity is going to be limited by about by a quarter or by a half. I think we're going to be limited to doing things by appointment. So check out our Facebook page for more information on that. When we do open, it should be soon. But in the meantime, we do these pop-ups with really illustrative history, historical. What do we call you?
Historical hystericals.
With people who know history, and we
Yeah,
have these
sometimes they're lay
conversations.
historians.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're actual people with doctoral degrees and
Some
or at least master's degrees. Some of them are journalists who do a lot of discussion of history.
Well,
And
sometimes we're lay
that's really
historians.
that's where it needs to be. That's where it needs to be. And that access, more people will have access to that than the academic kind of treatment, the straight up academic kind of treatment.
Well,
And a lot of the academic treatments are actually very questionable. There's one of these days we should get into the description of Filipinos, particularly the Bachelor Society,
yeah,
by white academics pre-1965, because that in and of itself is an interesting trek.
Okay. Yeah.
Anyway,
that's the next subject, because that's one of the things because this was the place where Filipinos were central in the 30s, the 20s, 30s, and 40s. How they
we got the most notice. This is where we got the most notice. Hawaii and California, and the West Coast. Yeah. Hawaii, California, Washington. We got the most notice, and most of it was bad. This was where we made a lot of history, and the Roldan case is an example of that, right? Challenging white supremacy.
Yeah. So
that's a big deal.
Yeah, it is. You're referring to the
Roldan versus the county clerk, Los Angeles.
Oh yeah, Roldan. Yeah, but what? Well, look, we got to get into that more when we have more time. But see, all these things are part of our history. You know it. You know a lot about why you are the way you are, right? That's kind of the point. So, Dan, I'm going to end our live stream. Stay on the Zoom stream. But for those of you who are catching us now, if you missed any or all of this, use the fast forward. It'll be on the Facebook page, and you can go up and down and catch what you missed when we talked. You have an analysis of where the Filipino electorate is today. So thank you for watching our Facebook Live. I'm Emil Guillermo. Thank you for being here on just taking part in our pop-up. And please remember the museum. Go to my there's a picture of my mother and father. Click on that and see if you don't have similar pictures. And then tell me your story, and we'll have you on a Filipino American National Historical Society.
Now you're talking. Now you're talking.
Yeah. This is people's entree to history. They click on, they look at a picture of their mother and father, they look at a family wedding picture, and they say, wow, what happened? Well, why were they wearing those weird clothes? Why were all those Filipinos, in the case of the picture of my family, my mother and father and their wedding cake, who are those people? What were they doing? Yeah. Why were they in San Francisco? And they were living on 1632 Fulton Street, which is where they were when they first got married. Then they moved down to the south of Market. They moved actually they were on Fulton Street, and then we moved to the Mission District, to Guerrero. An interesting story, but look, part of our own personal histories, and our personal histories, they're dictated by our community general histories, which is American history, and a part of why we do what we do here. All right, Dan, stay on.
I'll see you at the post party. There's a post party afterwards.
A post party. Oh yeah. All right. Yeah. You're going to the post party.
All right.
In the meantime, you Facebookers, thanks for joining us, and have yourselves a great weekend. Join me again tomorrow for another pop-up here on the FANHS Museum Facebook page.
All right, man. Thank you very much, Emil.
Thank you.